Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Let's make sure everything's working. Audio is good. Sound good. All right. We are on.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cults of Consciousness. I am Shalise Ansola, and we are back with another episode of Culty Comparisons. And I laugh because I just made it up and I think it's fun. Or I made it up the last live. We are joined again by the ever amazing Apostate Aladdin. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me again, and so soon after the
Yeah.
first episode.
I know, guys, we did this yesterday, and then we went onto his channel to continue the conversation, and then we were just like, wow, we still have so much to talk about. And all of the comments were like, keep going, I could listen for hours, which thank you. It's very sweet. We appreciate that. And it seemed like we got a lot of positive feedback too. So we're like, you know what? Let's just run it back. We'll just do this again until we get through our notes here. So that's what we're going to do.
You seem very confident that today we're going to finish it according to the title, and I applaud you for that confidence, but we'll see.
We'll see. We did cover quite a bit in the first one. And actually, before I give a little overview, I think you wanted to briefly address the mask, which will inevitably come up in the comments for people who just don't watch the video.
Right. So for people always ask, why are you wearing a mask? You're alone at home, and they assume that it has some connotations to it, something that has to do with specifically American politics. And no, it does not. I wear the mask always to hide my identity, because there are usually consequences, social or legal, or worse, and danger that people get in for criticizing the religion of Islam. And I want to protect myself and my loved ones. So that's why I wear the mask, for anonymity.
Yes, thank you. And guys, if you haven't already, go to Apostate Aladdin's channel and subscribe. He's got some great videos over there talking about Islam, his own experience. He has other people come on and share their experiences. And I mean, it's interesting seeing the crossover. It's always fun when I see people in the comments that are like, oh, my two favorite YouTubers collabing. And I'm thinking, why didn't you tell me before that you had another YouTuber that you would want us to collab with? Because we just kind of happen upon people like we happened upon you. I think maybe a few people did recommend you in our comments, which is why I had you saved. And then you reached out and I was like, oh, look at that. We were already going to reach out to him. So that was kind of a happy accident. But guys, if you're listening and you have other YouTubers that you want us to collab with, please let us know. All of that to say, we do have an audience that is kind of cross-pollinated already. But in case you're not subscribed, go subscribe.
Yes, please do. If you're interested in the stuff that I do, and then you can unsubscribe, but subscribe first.
No, don't unsubscribe. Oh, we even have Val here. Hey, Val. We want to get Val back on the channel. He came from, we actually talked briefly about the Order, the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saint group in Utah. So we need to do more with Val too. Okay, so let's see. Someone says we need to do an ongoing collab. I'm just looking at my notes here. It's this huge Google Doc, 2 pages. And this is kind of what we covered yesterday. General statements, both Abrahamic-based.
Hey, Luis, what's going on?
Abrahamic-based religions that borrow from Abrahamic scripture, claiming to be monotheistic religions. Oh my gosh, you guys, stuttering today. But don't believe in the Trinity. What else do we got? Muhammad claimed he was the final prophet, and Joseph Smith actually said, do you want to read the quote?
Yeah, so this is a quote. Joseph Smith said, "I shall be to this generation a new Muhammad." And he adopted as his fighting slogan the words, which he thought he had learned from Islam, either the Al Quran or the sword, which I couldn't find a quote for or anything very closely related to that in Islam. But also, it's kind of a misquote. He didn't understand that Al Quran meant the Quran. So it's kind of like saying, I suppose it's kind of like saying chai tea, because chai means tea. So it's like saying tea.
Wait, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Or apparently
Chai is my
non-bread.
favorite.
If you say non-bread, that's like saying bread, I think. So I didn't
The
know that.
more you know.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, so Joseph Smith, I think, stole a lot of things from Islam, which not surprised because he borrowed from a lot of other things too, like Freemasonry and the temple rituals, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. So what else? We talked about the founders. They were both claimed to be visited by angels. They both had revelations that were super convenient to what they needed at the time and things they needed people to do. They'd be like, "Well, God just told me."
Sorry, I was
What
talking to a
else? They
friend of mine.
both married underage
We're
girls.
all getting ready for my birthday next week, so
Both wanted polygamy to be a thing, and in Islam, polygamy is still a thing. In mainstream Mormonism, it is currently not a thing, but in the fundamentalist sects, very much still alive. What else? What am I missing?
So they both migrated. And I want to make a small correction because I remember saying that he only had a couple dozen followers when he first migrated, when Muhammad migrated from Mecca to Medina. I think the number is actually closer to 80. I don't remember
Mm,
exactly. I found a couple dozen. Maybe at first he didn't have except a couple dozen followers, but by the time that he migrated, it was around 80. But then his
okay.
exploded when he went to Medina.
Yes. So we were talking about how
Mhm.
both religions were super successful because they migrated. And in your case, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a lot of war and forcing people to convert. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. There was a
Okay.
lot of conflict, and I did a bunch of research today to be sure. And the best case scenario is you hear a lot of apologetics about how every single war he got in was a defensive war.
Ascension WoW is a standalone World of Warcraft private server that reimagines WoW in a brand new.
But if you got in so many wars in such a short span of time, like that's a bit suspicious. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of instances where he goes way beyond just defensive. I mean, there are some very brutal instances. I mentioned one last time we.
I agree. It doesn't sound like they were all defensive, especially even if you read the context. They don't sound defensive to me. Some of them may have been, but I think it was just general warfare, from what I could tell.
Spoke. Yeah, and did we get to talking about slavery,
A
or
little
did
bit.
we not?
Yeah.
A
Because we
little bit.
talked about
And there are parallels with the Bible there also. Don't think that they're not. So that's not what I'm saying for those who are wondering. But yeah, no, there's definitely active warfare, and it sounds more aggressive than passive, or at least more than defensive.
the woman who was sealed to Joseph Smith as an eternal slave.
Right. Yeah, but then we didn't talk about it further on the Islamic side, did we?
I think you mentioned that, like the sex slave thing, but was there more to that?
Yeah, there's a lot more to that. So in Islam, slavery is not illegal. Like to this very day, there's nothing about Islam that says you can't have slaves. It's
Oh no! Anyone wants to hop into the room? This would be a good chance for you to defend yourselves and your faith.
just
Oh.
that it all ended in like the 1980s, I think. That's because the UN pressured a lot of Muslim majority countries to stop it. But there's nothing in Islam that prevents slavery. And I mean, there's a lot of apologetics about why ideas like it was already a common thing back then and they couldn't just outlaw it, then no one would join Islam because you can't like take away their slaves, which is a very ridiculous assertion because if you're God and you're sending people the truth, you don't care what people think. It's not like you're pressured to do whatever people want.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Islam, slavery is allowed in the sense that if you lose in a war, the winning army, which is like the Muslim army, could take people of yours and make them slaves and just divvy them up. They can sell them, they can buy slaves even, which is something that is, I mean, it's one thing to say that captives
You
of war are slaves. It's another to go to a slave market and buy slaves. You don't know how they became slaves.
Yeah.
It's not even the same method necessarily. And
Hey,
then
anyone
it
interested?
goes
Come on,
further.
looking
Like
for debate.
if a person owns a female slave, they can have intercourse with her. Which, as you put it before, it's
Link is
not
in the room.
consensual. The power dynamics are not balanced there.
Mhm.
And the last thing I want to add to that, sadly, children of slaves are still slaves. So you can effectively have like a slave factory and trade in slaves, and it's all allowed. And it's one thing to say that, look, that was just a status quo and he couldn't just stop it. And there's a lot of apologetics about how Islam really encourages you to free slaves. And yeah, you do get rewards if you free slaves, like, brownie points with God, but it's not mandatory. and it didn't work clearly because there was still slavery till the 1980s.
Mhm.
So it's sad that it was a chance to fix the world, but instead he legalized it. He just put it in law that that's a thing.
Is that sad though?
So yeah,
Hang on.
that's slavery
Did
in
you
Islam.
say 1980s? You didn't mean 1890s?
Yeah, I'm talking like just a
Like
generation ago.
recently?
Yeah. And I'm not
Whoa.
saying everywhere. It's not like every country had slaves, but that
Right.
was a thing in a lot of Muslim countries. Like it was remnants of that. And even I think in Saudi Arabia, there were up until the 1980s. There's even footage on YouTube. It's probably too difficult to view on this stream, but if you look it up and just beware that it's sad to see. There's footage from the 1970s or 80s, like old footage of slave markets in Saudi Arabia. And
Oh my
there's
gosh.
nothing Islamically illegal about that.
Where are they getting these people in the 1970s?
To be
Just
honest, I
trafficking?
don't know. If we were to believe, that they were doing it just the Islamic way, then it would have to be through war or through trading. You can't go to a free person and make them your slave, but there are other ways apparently, or maybe it's a lineage of slavery that
Oh my
still,
gosh.
existed. It's really sad. And people talk a lot about slavery in the US, the more recent version that we're all familiar with, but the Arab slave trade was terrible. It was devastating, and it's kind of forgotten about.
Meet the new.
Wow, the commercials on here are going to be terrible. Ooh, what happened? Give me some.
They'll remember it. So yeah, it's pretty sad, and it's one of those things that we don't talk about it a lot as Muslims. We're not taught a lot about it. We read verses about it maybe, but we don't think about it too much. But
Yeah.
if God is real, I would ask God, why? You could have done something about it. Why didn't you?
Yeah. What are some of the other things that people know about and they know that that's part of the doctrine, but they just pretend it doesn't exist or just maybe don't even teach it?
So I don't understand that what this guy's saying. People say that with Christianity too. Oh, God could stop at any time. Well, in Christianity, you have free will. So, and in Islam, it's like triple predestination in a way. It's not just double predestination. So I don't know. I don't see that code of ethics even applying to Islam. It's kind of weird that he's trying to apply Western ethics to Islam.
Teach it.
Like we talked last time about heavenly
So exhausted and so heartbroken.
maidens that
Yeah.
men get to sleep with.
More slaves.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, I guess I didn't clarify last time. I mentioned it's not even clear if they're humans. Like their entire purpose is that. So I don't know personally if they have a soul. They're not like humans that existed on Earth that are then transported into heaven.
So
They were
they're
just
sex
created for that
angels.
purpose. Yeah, I mean, but they have flesh, and funny thing is the description of their flesh. There's a lot of fetishizing of paleness in the religion, which is very indicative of the region. I guess that was exotic for the region, so that's why it was, as a sign maybe of someone not spending too much time in the sun, maybe being
Mhm.
royalty. That, or most people didn't have that luxury of being pale, because they lived in a desert. So yeah, the description is that they're so pale, they're almost translucent, like you can sort of see inside them,
Ew.
which is freaky.
Yeah. These like angel ghost beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So point is, I'm not sure if they're humans, like they're not actual real humans that lived among us, but they were created for that purpose. So do they have a soul? Can they say no? Do they have free will? I don't know, but do we have free will in heaven? I don't think we do.
Yeah, I
But
don't think
that's a
so
story
either.
for another time.
Does anyone really know? Speaking of heaven, we kind of talked about the levels of heaven in Mormonism. So you have the celestial kingdom, which is the top, And then within the celestial kingdom, you have 3 more that are like the super celestial kingdoms. It's not a real name. I just made it up. But there's different tiers. The rules of how to get there are all a little
Celestial
murky.
Kingdom Pro and Celestial Kingdom Pro Plus.
And light, celestial kingdom light. Basically, to get to the highest level, you have to do things like go to church every Sunday, probably hold callings. You have to be a worthy temple recommend holding member, which means you have to go to the bishop and confess your sins and make sure you're not doing anything bad, following all the rules, which we're going to.
It is interesting that the Mormons do have active confession the way you would probably understand it. I should hit play. Sorry.
We're going to talk about the rules today. You have to go and do temple work for dead people. What else? This is a big one. You have to be sealed in what they would call the traditional family marriage, man, woman. And let's say I was married, not celestially married. I was married in the temple, and then my husband, he's not like a good guy anymore, according to the church. Maybe he drinks coffee, and so he's not worthy. Or let's just give him a little higher sin. Maybe he watches pornography. Super hard no for Mormon church. So if I were to,
Does Dan McCullen not watch pornography? I want to know. With his little LGBTQ bracelet, does he still not allowed to watch pornography?
he were to die, and we get to heaven, I couldn't get into the celestial kingdom because I have to have a worthy priesthood holder pull me through the veil by calling my secret name, and then I would hear that name and be like, "That's me." Which, by the way, you get a secret name, like your true name, when you go through the temple, and no one can know about your husband, and you can't know his name, but he can know your name, so he can pull you into heaven. But if he's not worthy, you're not getting through, which is why a lot of women feel obligated to divorce their husbands if they're not following the rules, because it literally affects their salvation. So
So
there's
what
a
if we
mouthful
flip that
for you.
around? What if the wife is the coffee drinker or whatever, enjoyer?
Well, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter, because your bro's gonna get through into heaven, and then he's just gonna get a bunch of wives assigned to him because polygamy in heaven is required.
Right. Well, how do Mormons explain that that clear preference for males, or that difference in how they're treated, males and females?
They just say men and women have different strengths, and we love the women and we respect the women, and the women should raise the children and have the babies, and don't talk too loud, and try not to insert your opinions, and probably don't go to college because you really should be getting on having those kids, because there's souls up there waiting to be born, and they need you, mom, to bring them down to earth so they can be Mormon.
I'm going to give away this incredible $4,000. Wait, no.
No, go back. Go back.
Respect the women, and the women should raise the children and have the babies, and don't talk too loud, and try not to insert your opinions, and probably don't go to college because you really should be getting on having those kids, because there's souls up there waiting to be born, and they need you, mom, to bring them down to earth so they can be Mormon. So the thing is, there's been a big movement where women wanted more equality in the church, even if that just means being able to speak in general conference, which happens twice a year. All of the higher ups of the church get together and they speak for God, and everyone's supposed to tune in and listen. And usually there's like 2 women out of, let's just say, 15, 20 men. It's probably more. I haven't watched in a long time. I try to forget those things, but it's really unbalanced. And so even just, they'll say, well, we have the Relief Society, which is a women's organization. it was founded by Emma Smith, Joseph Smith's wife, first wife. And they're like, yeah, it's meant to help and raise up women. All that's great. And yes, we do have that, but it's still overseen by men. They can't make any decisions on their own. Even when they have activities, a man has to be present. It's still very clear that women aren't capable, in their opinion, of doing anything on their own, or they need a priesthood holder, which is what they call the guys. So yeah, it's clearly misogynistic, and even the temple ceremony was changed, where it used to be the woman would swear her obedience to her husband, and her husband would swear obedience to God, and they recently changed it. So, I mean, baby steps, I guess, but
Yeah, it is
it
weird
is what
that
it is.
the Mormonism is so fluid and changeable and malleable. It does make it a little less interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to draw parallels with Islam, but when you first said that meeting that is twice a year, in Islam, men and women are not supposed to be in the same place. Like when you go to the mosque, there's a men's section and a women's section. I don't know if I
Oh.
made that clear earlier.
Mm-mm.
That's not like
Yeah, that is an interesting thing.
an extremist mosque. That's every single mosque ever. Men and women do not mix. And maybe somewhat understandably, the way that women are viewed as sexual objects or temptation or lust for men, it makes sense, because in the prayer, I mean, it makes sense to separate them in that context, because in prayer, they kneel down, they bend over. And if you're not even supposed to look at a woman, imagine, having one in front of you bent over. So in Islam, that's a big no-no. But even beyond just, going and praying at the mosque, they don't mingle inside the mosque. Like, it's a completely different section. You don't even see the women, kind of like what I was describing with my school. That's what the mosque is like. And I was thinking about women in higher positions or in position of government. I mean, thankfully, a lot of the countries that are majority Muslim now have some elements of secularism, even though they might also have elements of Islamic law, or that would, take precedent, even if unofficially sometimes. So there are women in government, but according to Islam, women should never rule. Like there's not a lot of room for women in government, let alone as a leader. Like there's a hadith, a saying by Muhammad, where he said that لن تفلح قوم something led by imra. So a people will not prosper if they're led by a woman, and that's just something that he said. So yeah, women are
He just flat out
infantilized
said
a
it.
lot in Islam. Yeah, he just said it. Like they will never
Interesting.
prosper. But we clearly see nations today that have women in government and even as prime ministers, and they're doing pretty well, especially compared to a lot of Muslim majority countries. But with believers, there's always a way to explain that away as well. They get their God is testing them. He's giving them all that they want in this life, so that in the afterlife he can punish them even harder, or he can say, I gave you everything, what's your excuse? But yeah, to sum it up, women in Islam are also like sort of a lower tier, except it's not framed that way, of course, but they are at a lower tier. There's even a verse that says it, and in that same verse it says that a man can beat his wife if she disobeys. But in that verse it says that men are dominant over women, or in a more softer translation, caretakers of women. It's verse 34 of Surah An-Nisa, of the surah number 4, chapter number 4, verse 34. And even in the most soft explanation and interpretation that men are caretakers over women, it's said in a very infantilizing way. Like there are a lot of rights that men have over their women, and yeah, there's a clear imbalance there. And there's also the same excuse that men and women are just built different. There's each has their virtues and each has their power, and we need each other, but we're just different. And I've always wondered, why did God create us that way then? Couldn't God create two genders that were very, different, but not in a hierarchy, like in a hierarchy sort of way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the patriarchy. I don't love it so much. And it seems like in most of the religions that we cover or groups that we cover, even if it's just a family cult, they use the patriarchy as an
I really
excuse
like
to
this.
push down
I really
abuse.
like this comparison between Islam and Mormonism. I don't think they're equivalent. I know a lot of people try to make that equivalency. I don't think it's really there, but I do think it's interesting. I do.
And like you said, infantilize women and children. And I don't like it. So, yes, gender roles are very much a thing in Mormonism. It used to be that, so I say they used to be, so I'm giving them credit. They are changing slightly, but it used to be that not men, boys would go on missions when they were 19, and then girls couldn't go until they were 21. And I was told that it's because they want the girls to get married.
I tried dating a Mormon chick, like actually date, not like in high school when I was dating that my friend who was Muslim, but like actually dating, like dating, and it did not go well. The first time I drank alcohol, we went to like an extended family thing, and everyone was drinking alcohol, and yeah, that was the end of that whole thing. It was a disaster.
Instead of going on a mission. And if you're not married by 21, I guess get out there, go convert people. So they're really encouraging you to get married young. They just reduced the limit. So for boys it's 18 now, and we know that reason is because boys were going to 1 year of college when they graduated high school, messing up, and then they had to wait a whole other year to repent before they could go out. So yeah, they're sending out kids basically to go on missions. We did an interview with my cousin who went, and she talked about her experience and how it was awful. So much medical neglect. She basically had no money for food. It was just, anyways, you can go check that out. It's with Keely.
These commercials are really pushing me
With Norwegian, wake up.
There's way too many commercials, man.
At home with a little one, can you drop the link to that? He's at home moderating. So okay, what else were we talking about? Gender roles. Is there anything else within that category that you wanted to mention?
I mean, I want to mention that I know women in my life that are strong and capable, and my mother is one of them. So I'm not saying that in Muslim countries it's impossible for a woman to work hard or to be educated. Of course, it is possible. What I'm saying is that it's easy to use the religion and not even abuse it or stretch it. It's very easy to use the religion verbatim to restrict women in that way. And I'm glad that there are women who are able to do more than what the literal translation of the religion or the literal application would allow them to. For example, a man, there are a lot of interpretations that say that a man can decide whether or not his wife can leave the house to go visit her parents, even. Like that's the degree of control that he can have.
Wow.
Thankfully, a lot of people don't live that way. But unfortunately, the problem is that some people do, and there's nothing that can be done to combat that. Like there's no law in most of these countries, or all of them, that says you are not allowed to control your wife to that extent. It's not considered abusive, especially that in many cases she somewhat agrees to it because she thinks that's what God said. And there's a lot of pressure tactics like these. Like this one's a very gross one, but I'll try to not be graphic about it. There's a saying about the prophet that says, if a woman refuses her husband intimacy, sleeping with him, for any reason that is not valid, and by valid they mean,
I remember reading this part and being very uncomfortable when I read it in the Quran.
If she's on her period, because you're not allowed to have sex on your period, or if she's sick. Other than that, there's no good reason. If she refuses him that, then the angels curse her all night. So there's a lot of pressure there.
Yikes.
Yeah, and the religion does not recognize marital sexual assault. Like that's not a category. A man can do whatever. It's his wife. And that's unfortunately a sad thing that a lot of women have to live with.
Yeah, we've done some interviews with some ex-Mormons who've talked about something similar. Even men who straight up admitted that when they were on their mission presidents would say things like, well, you can't masturbate, you can't look at porn, but don't worry, once you get married, you can use your wife and she's your toy now. And so really
That's
just demeaning
gross.
women and reducing women to a
Yeah, that's not cool.
sex toy that they can use whenever they want. And you have these young boys who are amped up because they haven't explored at all and they're just like bursting at the seams, come home from their mission, try to get married right away, like immediately. We're talking they have a week engagement or something crazy, or they know each other for a week and get engaged and then get married a month later. It's super, super common. Or this is one of my favorites because Utah is so close to Vegas. They'll go to Vegas, get married, have sex all weekend, and then get it annulled and go back to Utah. But they were married, so they weren't breaking any rules. I mean, there's a lot of sex Mormon loopholes that we could talk about. But yes, the fact that men are told, don't worry, guys, you're going to have a wife to use. And the more righteous you are, the hotter your wife is going to be, which creates a lot of perfectionism complexes in women and feeling like they have to look and act perfect. And it's just this big old mess. All of it has to do with making the woman into an object, basically objectifying women.
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of parallels to everything you just said in Islam as well.
Let's hear this.
And I want to remind people that I'm not saying that that's just how every Muslim relationship is. I'm saying that unfortunately many can be that way, and there's no avenue to save those people in those situations. And in Islam, I don't think I've mentioned this before. If we're just following the Islamic law, and in a lot of countries, unfortunately, that's still the dominant factor here. A woman is not really allowed to divorce her husband as easily as a
No, there was passages about divorce in Islam, in the Quran. I mean,
husband can divorce a wife. So a husband can say, "I divorce you," and it's done. The deed is done. But a woman has to make a case to a judge and say, "This is why I want to divorce." Like there has to be a good reason. So, and then imagine a situation where a woman who is unhappy in her marriage, maybe her husband's too aggressive, maybe he's just, not a good person, and she goes to make her case to a strange man, and he says no, or let me think about it, and she goes back home to the abusive husband. That's very common, unfortunately. And
I wonder if I should be doing this stream on TikTok. I probably should, but I'm too fucking old for TikTok,
I said earlier, a man has license to discipline his wife, and nobody can do anything about it. And there's a big culture of, the man is the leader of the house, and anything that happens in the family unit these are private affairs that have to do with him. So abused women are either told that, it's his right to do this, or talking about it is like backstabbing him or spreading rumors about him and the family. It's not good for your honor, for his honor, that kind of stuff.
Is that
so
true?
There's immense pressure on a lot of women. And again, it's to varying degrees. There are people who don't observe to that extent. There are people who think it's terrible, but they can't do anything about it. I just think it's terrible that God, if it exists, would give license to men to beat their wives, or would create the situations that allow for this to happen, would create that power imbalance, and then hope that men are good enough not to do it.
I don't understand why people. I'm more on her side. Like when she's talking about Mormonism, that makes sense. But his complaints against Islam don't really make sense to me. Most of this is just whining. Oh, a religion founded, 1,500 years ago doesn't have the same morals as modern day, whatever.
That's I expect better from God.
If you could imagine your ideal way of working, what would it look like? Monday.com can make it your reality. With Monday.com, every business, no matter the industry or size, can simply work better. Monday.com adapts to every team's needs.
Yeah.
All right, I'm telling you what, guys, no one's hopping in here. I'm going to give you guys another 20 minutes to do this, and then we're going to switch topics and move on to the Dinesh Alex debate, because no one's hopping in here to do this, and I got about an hour to kill, so I'm going to go 10 more minutes, and if no one's in here debating, we're switching topics.
Yeah, and let's talk more about kind of segueing into this purity culture thing, because there's a lot of objectifying women, and there's analogies like in Mormonism, the chewed gum analogy, that if you have sex before marriage, you are a piece of chewed gum or a licked cupcake. And we would do these object lessons in Sunday school.
That's
in
gross.
Young Women's is what they would call it. When you hit 12, you start going to this separate class where they start teaching you how to be a wife and a mom. And they bring in cupcakes and they do the whole demonstration. And you start to realize that you gotta keep everything locked down in order to be a good Mormon. And sometimes things happen and it creates a lot of guilt and shame. Sometimes abuse happens and they have no control over that and they just feel broken. So there's a lot around purity culture. And this is not just specific to Mormonism or Islam. I mean, it's basically every single cult member we talked to, aside from the orgasm cult, which flipped it on its head. There's and the Children
Orgasm
of God,
cult?
which flipped it in a very gross, awful way. Most religions have purity culture and they are obsessed with a woman's virginity. So is there anything you want to add about that?
Yeah, so there's multiple things I want to say here. So we do have similar analogies. I don't know how old they are, but at least I've heard them in my lifetime, about not even a woman who's had sex, just how covered a woman is. So the uncovered woman is like an unwrapped candy that's either, imagine the lollipop, it's a little bit moist maybe, and you just throw it on the ground. You'll have dirt stick to it, maybe even, bugs would start licking it. That's how they describe the uncovered woman, and they would ask you, what would you prefer, a lollipop that has, its cover on it, or a lollipop that's collected dirt and bugs.
Whoa, that's next level.
Yeah. And that's not even about a woman who's had sex. That's just about what she's wearing or how covered she is. And like we talked about in the last streams, we're not talking necessarily short shorts and, a bikini or anything like that. The way that women are supposed to cover up is it's like head to toe. Maybe their face can show. People disagree on whether or not the hijab, the hair covering, is mandatory, but it's highly encouraged. And I am not a woman, so I didn't grow up being told the stories that girls heard. So like I said, when we went to school, we were separated, boys and the girls. So they heard a lot of horror stories. Like, for example, every hair that a man sees
the title of the stream
is
midstream.
an increment of punishment. I can't remember exactly what it was, but that's just, imagine every single hair that a man sees, and that's one man. Multiply that, but however many men could see you if you're not wearing a hijab, and how women could be dragged by their hair and thrown into heaven for that, for men perceiving their hair. There's
Wow.
this big obsession with hair being a part of a woman's private parts almost. It's really scary, and it's sort of like when you move the goalposts, when you make it so that men don't usually see women's hairs, it becomes almost arousing to see a woman without hair. I mean, with her hair showing. It's the same thing with how the joke that we keep hearing about, ankles that people in some parts of the world get attracted to, just a woman's ankle, because that's the only piece of skin that they can see. When you keep shifting the goalposts, it becomes arousing to see what is normal in other places. And they see that arousal as a sign that they're right, that yes, we should cover that up, because guys get aroused when they see a woman with her hair loose. Yeah, I could talk about this for a long time. It's really frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. And we actually go into depth about that with your interview. So everyone go check that out if you haven't. Not the lives, but we did an actual interview with Aladdin, and we talked specifically about sex and purity culture and how it affected him as a guy, because we frequently talk about it from the female perspective. So go check that out. Real quick, we have a super chat from Molly. Thank you so much, Molly. Not only Mormons or Muslims look at Catholics. Yeah, we did a couple episodes on that. Not everyone was very happy that we covered Catholicism. But
you know what? I'm gonna go
definitely
back
is
and
worth
watch your
talking about.
Catholicism stream.
And of course, there are very varying levels to which people practice it, just like with Islam and just like with Mormonism too. I mean, you could say that modesty is not required in Mormonism. I don't have to wear a t-shirt like this. But if you don't, you're looked down upon, or you may not get a temple recommend, or if you have your garments, which we talked about on your stream, the t-shirt and shorts that you have to wear once you go to
I'm
the
changing
temple
the
under
stream
all
because
of
no
your
one's hopping
clothes,
in here to debate.
you have to be modest, because if they
let's go have
show,
some fun.
then you're
Let's
basically
go wreck some Dinesh.
sinning. I don't know a better way to put it. You're disrespecting God by not keeping your covenants, is what they would say, keeping your covenants. So
Yeah, and we'll watch her Catholic thing if I remember to come back to this channel at any point. All right, we're hopping on to Dinesh because no one's in here to debate Islam, and I really wanted to debate Islam, and well, I guess the chickens.
Hello, we have with us Dr. Musharraf Hussain, who is the Chief Executive of the Academy Institute
Selah.
here in Nottingham.
I wanted to have a debate about Islam, but nobody wanted to come in, so I'm switching over to the Dinesh thing. If you want to have talk about Islam, feel free to come in, man. The link's in my room. Right now, it'd just be me and you. I don't think there's anyone else here right now. Here, I'll put another copy of the link just in case you want to come in. You're welcome to talk to me if you want. You want to talk about Islam, feel free. But I'm going to move on to the Dinesh and O'Connor debate because no one no one hopped in for this. Do. All right, let's do this. This was such a terrible.
So the fun thing with the serpent is, how does a serpent talk? What? And not only that, but why is the serpent's punishment?
Nope. Music. Don't like music. Let's see. Skip the upcoming. There we go.
Yeah, we're about 15 minutes away from starting. So he's up here doing a little pre-show chat with me today.
Yep. Travis and I, we've been talking for a while now, haven't we? Through we met on Discord. What?
Well, you came in the StreamYard days. So Don was originally just someone who signed up to come on and have engage in a digital to our weekly show or so
on the update, and we kind of talk about these topics. We go over it week by
This was a terrible topic choice. I think a lot of people have said that.
week. What's going on in the intellectual sphere, what people are talking about and stuff like that. It's been fantastic.
If you guys want to join us, if you're ever looking for a place that you can go to online that you're going to get a good faith, helpful engagement with your ideas, and you like talking about different topics, like the topic tonight, is the Bible true? You can come into the Penguin Discord server and find a conversation at any time throughout your day. If you work the night shift, or if you work somewhere where you're allowed to have a conversation happening in your ear and you're able to talk, a lot of people do that on our Discord server, and it's for bricklayers or PhDs. We have a variety of different levels of education and skills and techniques. One is not better than the other in the Penguin world. It's just everyone tries to engage in good faith and helpfulness. Those are the two kind of physical properties that hold the Penguin universe together, and that's what we look for our speakers to bring to the table when they come and speak, and we'll be looking for that from Alex and Dinesh tonight.
Yeah, the main point is to find a small refuge away from all the toxicity that you end up finding around these topics and the name calling and the unhelpfulness. And I think that that's like what we try to do on the online space. And as well, I know this Travis's mission within these conversations that hopefully Alex and Dinesh will have tonight
Yeah, well, I tell you, they were just hanging out doing a mic check here, and they are both pumped up and ready to go tonight. This is truly is an intellectual rumble in the Bronx, and I think that this is going to be the biggest intellectual.
Yeah, hold on, we got some questions in the chat. Speaking of which, this is supposed to be a live room, so anybody wants to come in, come in. Okay, so when the Quran says God is one, God the eternally sufficient unto himself, he begets not, nor was he begotten, and none was unto him. What would your objection to the... Well, I believe that God is a Trinity, so that would be my objection. I mean, I believe the Bible is true, and I'm going to go on the Bible side over the Quran side. It's just a matter of preference. I don't think there's a lot of... There's other intellectual factors when it comes to your faith, or anyone's faith, but I already bought into Christianity and Catholicism. So the fact that one of the precepts for accepting Catholicism is that, and Christianity is that God is a Trinity, that's what I believe. Because if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be a Christian. Question: was Marcion, there you go. Was Marcion right, and were all those that anathemize him wrong? Marcion was completely wrong. Marcion is one of the biggest heretics in history. Okay. And come into the room and debate me. Come on. Let's have some fun. I'm not out drinking. I'm here doing this on a Saturday night.
Intellectual challenge for each of them tonight. And I know that's saying a lot because Alex is 25. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Alex and haven't been following what he's been doing, he's been going head to head with some seasoned veterans in this space, and he's been doing extremely well, based on my opinion. And Dinesh, I mean, a lot of people would say that, like, when Dinesh went that...
I'm not going to lie. I know you said Marcion, but for a second, I thought you said Macron. And I was like, are we having a debate about Canadian politics? I mean, I'm down for it. I don't know what I'd be talking about, but I'm down for it. Let's see.
Hitchens didn't address the presuppositional argument that Dinesh.
Anyone's kept up with Alex's work. He recently was on Jordan Peterson's podcast.
Marcion is a heretic for multiple reasons. Number one, he tries to separate out the Old Testament from the New Testament. Jesus affirms the New Testament. Number two, the Bible precepts itself. The Father and I are one. You must baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Also, implications if you're going to take a univocal or inspired view of the Bible. You have things like the breath of God. You have no one has ever seen God, but the Bible itself claiming that people had seen God. So that has to be answered. There are Jewish explanations and there are Jewish heresies that say that God is two. So we go from a buying nature to a trying nature when we get to Christianity. Whether you want to argue that Jesus believed that or not as a man, I mean, that's pure academic speculation. But theologically speaking, Jesus is God, and therefore God himself would know that he was tripersonal.
Podcast, and what they talked about a lot was truth. And the question is the Bible true? Can go in many different directions. Like, which way is someone going to defend the truth? Are they going to go for like a archaeological scientific truth, which we've seen many years, or are they going to take a much more metaphorical approach to truth? And it's a question: is the discussion going to be able to? Are they going to be able to meet minds there, or not just talk past each other? And that's what's difficult in this conversation.
Right?
Is that each person comes from a different perspective of what they mean when they say that something is true.
Well, and when you start studying truth in the philosophical domain, you will realize there is this long list that outlines the different criterias of truth that all of us engage with throughout our day, whether we would like to admit it or not. Sometimes we just believe something to be true throughout our day because it's coherent to us. Sometimes for greater claims, we'll require a correspondence-like truth model, like we do in science. But also we'll make appeals to tradition. We will decide that we'll accept something as true simply because it's pragmatic to our purposes. So, one thing I always try to say in all of the Q&As I do, all the discussions I do is look up, and it's a good place to start, the Wikipedia for criteria of truth or criterias of truth. And that is a really good place to go and investigate, especially when you come to hear a conversation like this, because then you'll realize that the matter of which, whether something is true or not, might not be as black and white as we initially thought.
A lot of times we're kind of compelled when something just makes sense to us. We have like that feeling of, oh, aha, this makes sense to me all of a sudden, and then you believe it as true. Yeah. And that's just not, when you take a deeper investigation, that falls apart every time. You end up finding that it's not just because something makes sense to me, it's true. There are much more things for that. And that's what they're both going to discuss today.
Right.
And don't make them final questions, man. Keep on going. I'm here to talk to you. That's why I'm here. It's a Saturday night. I should be out doing something. And I've had several friends. That's why I keep on looking down. People are blowing up my phone. I'm here because I wanted to debate Islam and nobody hopped on. So if you want to debate any topic, let's do it. Come on. You want to come on the show? Come on the show. You don't want to come on the show? Ask as many questions as you possibly can. Drive me crazy. Push me to the limits of my knowledge. Ask away. Okay. Trinity, not in the Bible. That's not true. I just gave you examples of where the Trinity is in the Bible. The word Trinity is not in the Bible. Just like none of the authors are in the Bible. I'm sorry, man. They're synonymous and anonymous works. We don't know who actually wrote the Bible. That's not divine inspiration that's giving you that. The numbers of the Bible, the verses of the Bible, that's not in the Bible. Okay? None of the numbers, none of that is divine inspiration. They're title heads. They're added on to. They're ways to organize the book. We assume that Luke is Luke and Mark is Mark and Matthew is Matthew. And as a Christian, I'm going to argue that Luke really did write Luke. But it's totally plausible and probably even more probable that the Lucian school or the Lucian church is the one that wrote Luke. Just makes sense. But just like those things, the chapter headings are not in the original manuscripts until people start writing them down. Same thing here. Trinity doesn't have to be in the Bible word for word because what the definition is exists in the Bible. The definition of the Trinity is in the Bible. I and the Father are one. It's just part of the way that it goes. You have Jesus's baptism, where you have God the Father identifying him as his beloved Son. You have the dove, which is the Holy Spirit, coming down on him. These are Trinitarian formulas presented in the Bible. Let's see, Jesus is not. No, Jesus is God, Son of God in the Bible. So, Son of God. He doesn't say Son of God. He says Son of Man. Son of Man. He doesn't call himself Son of God. Son of Man, and Son of Man is a distinction that means Son of God to us. These are theological understandings and developments. But you just have to read the Bible. Read it in order. Don't read it piecemeal. Don't separate it out. Read it from front to end, and you'll see. Well, St. Paul is not Jesus. St. Paul says Son of God. Sure, I guess. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But again, that's just Trinitarian formula. Paul is writing epistles to the churches that already existed, that are not yet, that don't yet have the gospel, at least not a written form of the gospel. They have an oral form, and whatever Paul himself or Peter or whoever else founded a church, did the 77 or 72 or 70. You're welcome, Marta. Hope you have a good night. Okay, let's keep going with this.
And yeah, and you know, you're going to get into a lot of these situations. Like behind us here, this is Michelangelo's the creation of God being Jesus.
Okay, let's move beyond it.
Dinesh's perspective was presenting the presuppositional argument, which presupposes the existence of God.
Coming out here.
So what is ClickUp? ClickUp is an...
What is ClickUp? ClickUp is... All right, here we go.
The 10 minutes each to lay out something of a case. We're not going to be too...
I think this was a mistake also, is that they didn't have a structured format. I think a structured format, Dinesh needed a structured format. I'm going to be very blunt. Another thing is that a lot of people in my videos have been saying, oh, well, you know, Alex destroyed Dinesh. No, no one destroyed Dinesh but Dinesh. Dinesh destroyed himself. O'Connor just asked a few basic questions to which there are stock answers to. And Dinesh, like, just remembered the title of the answer and then moved on to another answer that contradicted the previous answer. It wasn't a good showing.
Too strict with that, but and then hopefully most of the time we can dedicate to just having a chat. Dinesh said that I can go first, which seems a little odd given that he's, I suppose, technically on proposition, but I wanted to lay out a few different ways that I interpret the question and see where he wants to take it. Some people said that I shouldn't do this debate with this question. It's kind of an impossible question. It's the kind of question that requires more of an explanation to ask than to answer, which is a little bit strange. So I thought, you know, the Bible is not a book. It's a library, and like any good library, it contains an amalgamation of different genres. And so asking if the Bible is true, you might as well ask if the corpus of Shakespeare is true. It sort of betrays a misunderstanding of how people interact with the text. So I thought, will Dinesh argue that the Bible is literally true, historically true, allegorically true, morally?
The Bible is true in all those ways, but in different formats, because each book in the Bible is a different book. It's not one single book. It's many, many books.
True, theologically true, metaphorically true. And I suppose the only thing for it is to sort of try each one on for size. So maybe beginning with Genesis, in an attempt, clearly not at historicity, but rather allegory and metaphor. We can deal with one of our types of truth here. We're introduced to Adam and Eve, who are told in no uncertain terms by God not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You may begin to wonder why knowledge of good and evil is such a bad thing, but the thought is interrupted by the introduction of the serpent, who says to Eve, did God say that if you eat of the tree, then in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die? And Eve says, yes. And the serpent says, well, that's not going to happen. God just knows that if you eat of it, you'll become like him, knowing good and evil, and he doesn't want that. That's all.
I mean, fine.
You're not going to die. So,
but again, there's a problem, which is all that section is written after the section that follows it. So that's kind of a problem with O'Connor's explanation. He oversimplifies to embarrass either the Bible or Dinesh. I don't know.
So Eve famously takes the fruit, eats some, gives some to Adam, and what happens? Do they die in the day thereof? Some people say in a metaphorical sense, yes. We'll get to that in a second, but at least on the surface of it, no. What does happen? God tells us himself. He says, now the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must...
I'm surprised he didn't make a stronger case or make a larger point about God saying one of us. If I was an atheist, that's where I would just be hammering home as the one of us thing. Or if I was a pagan, I'd be arguing about the one of us thing, you know, a polytheist.
He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and eat from the tree of life, lest he inherit eternal life. And with this, Adam and Eve are banished from the Garden of Eden. So who's telling the truth here? This story is quite mystifying to me, and I'm not the first to point this out. There's actually an apocryphal gospel discovered near Nag Hammadi in Egypt in the 1940s, dated to around the 2nd or 3rd century, called the Testimony of Truth, a gospel that didn't make it into the New Testament, which identifies the serpent, interestingly, who's never called Satan in the text, by the way, identifies the serpent with Jesus.
Sorry, I was going to make a dumb joke. Yeah, the ancient enemy is not identified as Satan in the Old Testament, at least not in the first parts. Maybe toward the end you can start seeing implications, but yeah.
I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but it does seem that the sort of allegorical truth of the story leaves a lot to be desired. I'm told that maybe Adam and Eve died a sort of spiritual death, or mortality entered the world. But then we need to ask why it is that God had to proactively banish them from the Garden of Eden. This isn't some natural result of sin that, you know, mortality entered the world. They're banished. And the implication is that they could have just as easily reached out and eaten from the tree of life, but God didn't want this to happen. So he guards the gates of Eden with a cherubim, with a flaming sword. I find this quite strange.
But all of those are analogies and metaphors for other things. They're incorporating mythology from around different mythologies into the story. I mean, O'Connor clearly knows all of this, so I don't know why he's bringing it up as if he doesn't know all this stuff. I don't know if he's playing stupid to make Dinesh look stupid, or if he's playing stupid to give Dinesh softballs. Like, I know it sounds weird, but I feel like these questions are so sophomoric because he's trying to help Dinesh not make a fool out of himself. I know it doesn't seem like that now, but if you watch the debate, he keeps on throwing Dinesh lifelines that Dinesh keeps on throwing away.
Strange, and I'd like to know what Dinesh thinks of it. Moving on quickly, I suppose, to the events of the later Old Testament, skipping over Exodus, we're introduced to another form of truth that I want to potentially engage in, and that's the concept of moral truth. That's another one that I spoke about in the beginning just there, the concept of moral truth. When we look at some of the military conquests of the Old Testament, bear in mind that the promised land pledged to Abraham is not an empty plain. Its indigenous inhabitants had to be, shall we say, displaced by a series of military campaigns ordered by God and carried out by his prophets. Thus, we have such commands as in Deuteronomy, chapter 20. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. Sounds promising to start with. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. Some people...
Oh, I got to change the subtitle. I got to change the subtitle on the banner. Oh, no. Oh, no. I got to change the subtitle on the banner. Okay, let's see. Hide it. Rewrite it. Your chance to argue with me. Oh, your chance to be heard. I like it. I like it. Your chance to be heard. To be heard. Open room. I can scroll it like a ticker. Sure. Save. Save. I don't think the scroll thing's going to work. I think that was a mistake. Okay, it did. It's doing it. Let's do it. Let's do this. Woohoo! Okay, let's keep going.
Some peace. If they refuse to make peace and engage you in battle, which, why would they do that on these terms? Lay siege to that city.
At this point, you might as well just be arguing, well, why did they really, why did Helen, even talk to Paris? I mean, come on. How could she not know, How could she not know it was going to start a war? It's such a dumb question. Sorry, Alex, that was a dumb question, and you know it was.
City, when the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, and the livestock, and everything else in the city, they get to go. Sorry, hold on. You may take. Was he
hoping to provoke Dinesh into saying something stupid? Because he didn't need to provoke him. He went there all on his own.
Plunder for yourselves. That's right. Right, and you may use the plunder the Lord your God gives you from your enemies. Likewise, in 1 Samuel, we have the destruction of the Amalekites. There's the order, now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. I'm told sometimes that this is actually an exercise in hyperbole. God didn't mean everyone. It continues, do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children.
Okay, so you look so evil in that shot. That's awesome. Okay, so here's the thing. And I said this in my review. Revelation is progressive. Number one, all of this is written after the fact. So none of this was written when it was happening. So it's actually not even talking about this. It's actually talking about a society that had already been incorporated into the larger group, that you couldn't divide out between who really was or wasn't an Israelite or a Canaanite or whatever, Amorite. They were completely intermixed. So what you're really having is cultural differentiation between the larger cultures, and the Canaanites or whatever groups being slaughtered are just being representative of a much larger outside group. They're being representative of the Babylonians, just like how Babylon will be used as a reference to represent Rome in the New Testament. The Canaanites are being used to represent different cultures, probably the Hittites, probably the Phoenicians, probably the I don't know. Maybe the Egyptians. I think the Egyptians are just the Egyptians, but Egypt in the Exodus probably represents Babylon. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, and then Babylon represent. It's so complicated. It's so fun the way allegories work. And okay, so you got that going on. But if you're going to make it literal, if you got the fact that the Bible itself later on in its theological development, in its more mature parts, explains that no one has seen God and no one can see God without being destroyed. So what's happening? Well, what's happening is people are imagining what God is saying through their intentions, through his will, through the results, and they're reinterpreting events as if God had spoke. Now, we can believe God spoke or we cannot. That's a totally different conversation. But in the context of the story, of the greater narrative of the Bible, no one can see or hear God. So what's happening when these particular people hear and see God? That's the real question, not this law thing that Dinesh should have just brushed aside. Instead, Dinesh just goes apeshit.
Children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. And if you think that this is hyperbole, consider what happens when Saul does conduct the destruction of the Amalekites as ordered and decides to leave alive the king as well as some of the best of the livestock. He leaves them alive. For this small act of mercy, God responds by saying to the prophet Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king because he's turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. So not even the animals can escape this genocide. So I'd like to ask Dinesh, I suppose, directly, which is it? Is this a morally corrupt series of events, or do I have to dispel with my moral intuition that genocide, including of innocent children, is a bad thing? There's plenty more to talk about in that regard. I don't want to take up too much time. This isn't, of course, to mention the advocacy and explicit instructions around slavery in the Old Testament. Hopefully we can get onto those too, if we want to go down the moral path. But I think that the most natural interpretation of the question is this concept of historicity. The literal truth of the Bible, that is. This is where I think we have to move to the New Testament, because the genre of the gospel seems to be historical biography, unlike the mythology of a book like the Psalms or Genesis or Job. And here there's a lot to talk about. We begin with the birth narratives. There are two birth narratives in the Gospels, in Matthew and Luke. Both give different accounts. Both have a genealogy of Jesus, for example, but the genealogies are different. I'm told this is because one records Mary's genealogy and one records Joseph's. You can do this if you like. It doesn't seem like the most natural reading of the text if you're not already predisposed to synchronize the accounts.
So, okay. So he's going to pull a shitty move later on where he's going to try to have the Nas, and Dinesh doesn't take the bait. So, but I think it's because Dinesh doesn't understand the bait, not because Dinesh didn't want to. Just based on the rest of the bit. But he's going to try to say, well, there were many gospels. Okay, look, if you're going to say there's many gospels and you're going to include the Gnostic gospels, then you have to include it's not the Jubilee. It's, oh, come on. I'm going to remember it like 10 minutes from now when it's no longer relevant. Something, Joseph and Mary. Proto-Evangeline, Proto-Javagelin, Proto-something. Proto-Evangelican, Proto-Evangelical, Proto-Evangelical. Nope, that's not it. Evangeline, Proto-Evangeline. I'm now forgetting the anime series that I love. But anyway, yeah, so you got that going on. So, posh. Yes, I am going to drink this stream because this going a whole week not drinking during stream was torture. I'm going to add a link. I'm going to have him keep talking. I got a headset on. I can hear what he's saying. I'm not pulling a Hassan, but I'm going to go get some alcohol. All right, let's keep going. I want people to argue with me. Come on in. You're invited.
Then we have, for example, the flight to Egypt, which is only recorded in Luke, which is difficult to reconcile with Matthew's account that they went to the temple in Jerusalem instead. But more importantly, Matthew then says that the family traveled to Nazareth, and he says, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he shall be called a Nazarene, quoting the prophets. Now, you'll notice if you read an online Bible that where the Old Testament prophets are quoted, there's a little footnote telling you what the prophecy is. In this case, you won't find one. Because prophecy simply doesn't exist. It's not there. There's no such thing. So there are two options here. Either Matthew made up this prophecy or got it wrong, in which case the New Testament is mistaken, or the prophecy does exist, but for some reason fell out of our scriptural tradition and now no longer exists, which makes the accuracy and at least the completeness of the Old Testament suspect. So again, I'd like to ask directly which it is. Finally, I suppose I should mention the contradictions that a lot of people point to in the Gospels. Some of these I think are legitimate, some are not. I'll give you some examples very quickly of gospel contradictions that I do think are real contradictions. First, the date of Jesus' crucifixion. Was it before the Passover, as John states, or was it after the Passover, as the Synoptic Gospel state?
I don't feel like finding.
Second, Jesus is sending out his disciples to teach.
It's that's so terrible to say on a live stream. It's gonna be taken out of context. BS isn't in here, so he can't clip it. Mazel tov. I could. I got so many Bible commentaries. I could probably find out where that's supposed to be. Oh, I'll rewind it and I'll write it down. And if I feel like it later, I'll look it up. No promises. Need a piece of paper. And we're going to use this. Ugh, cat hair everywhere. Okay, what did he say?
But for some reason fell out of our scriptural tradition and now no longer exists, which makes the accuracy and at least the completeness of the Old Testament suspect. So again, I'd like to pound and say
there are
here.
The Bible itself says. The Bible itself says. Is that the right wording? The Bible itself says that there are parts of the Bible that are missing. Long lost books. The Book of Battles or something like that. Chronicles of Kings, something like that. Oh, I'm in the wrong thing. There we go.
You made up this prophecy or got it wrong, in which case the New Testament. So there are two options. Find one. Because the quote, family traveled to Nazareth, and he says, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he shall be called a Nazarene, quoting the prophets. Now notice if you read an online Bible that where the Old Testament prophets are quoted, there's a little footnote telling you what the prophecy is. In this,
I missed it again. Hold on, let's do this again. Okay. Bam.
With Matthew's account that they went to the temple in Jerusalem instead. But more importantly, Matthew then says that the family traveled to Nazareth, and he says, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he shall be called a Nazarene, quoting the prophets. Now notice if you read an online Bible that where the Old Testament prophets are quoted, there's a little footnote telling you what the prophecy is. In this case, you won't find one. Because quoted, there's a little footnote, the prophets. Now notice, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophet.
There we go.
And says that the family traveled to Nazareth, and he says,
yeah. Travel to Nazareth. So could be fulfilled. What? The prophecy of what?
Says, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he shall.
What was said through the prophets?
He shall be called a Nazarene, quoting the prophets. Now notice if you read an online Bible that where the Old Testament prophets are quoted, there's a little footnote telling you what the prophecy is. In this case, you won't find one. Because prophecy simply doesn't exist. It's not there. There's no such thing. So there are two options here. Either Matthew made up this prophecy or got it wrong, in which case the New Testament is mistaken, or...
Okay, there's only two of you in here right now. I'm going to do it. Look, we're getting drunk, and we're going to go look up Bible verses. Let me go get a Bible. I'll be right back. I'm going to let him just keep talking. I'll be back.
The prophecy does exist, but for some reason fell out of our scriptural tradition and now no longer exists, which makes the accuracy and at least the completeness of the Old Testament suspect. So again, I'd like to ask directly which it is. Finally, I suppose I should mention the contradictions that a lot of people point to in the Gospels. Some of these, I think, are legitimate, some are not. I'll give you some examples very quickly of gospel contradictions that I do think are real contradictions. First, the date of Jesus' crucifixion. Was it before the Passover, as John states, or was it after the Passover, as the Synoptic Gospels state? Second, Jesus is sending out his disciples to teach. In Mark, he tells them to take nothing with them except a staff. In Matthew and Luke, he says, take nothing with them, including no staff. So do they take a staff or do they not? A pedantic contradiction, but a contradiction nonetheless, and one that's led people like Barnabas, Ahern to write entire articles on this. And Augustine himself actually distinguished between a literal staff and a metaphorical staff to explain this difference. Anything, I suppose, except considering the possibility of even the most minor of gospel contradictions. Third, Jesus flipping the tables at the temple. A famous story, but did you know that in the Gospel of John, this takes place at the beginning of Jesus' ministry? In the Synoptics, it takes place near the end. So when did that occur? Mary Magdalene, after the resurrection of Jesus,
who cares about the
runs to the disciples in John's Gospel and says,
nobody cares about the fucking staff. Nobody. Hi. We're getting drunk. Sorry, it's YouTube. I'm just drinking soda. It's okay. We're getting soda-y. We're getting fizzy tonight.
in the Lord, and we do not know where they have put him. Strange thing for her to say if, as the Gospel of Matthew recounts, she's visited by an angel at the tomb who tells her exactly where Jesus is going, and then she's met by Jesus herself on the way to the disciples to bring them the news. Strange for her to then say that they've taken the Lord and we do not know where they've put him. There's more to say on this.
I'm kind of
interpolations, things which seem not to be in our oldest manuscripts, but end up in newer manuscripts of the New Testament, such as the adulterous woman, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Most scholars agree that this was not in our...
But it's not just most scholars agree. Most Bibles agree. That's not... I don't know of any Bible that says that's original. We understand that it was added later. It's not even an interpolation. It's literally an add-in. It's not like... I'm going to put it. It's not a mistake that it was added in. It was a marginal note that then people thought was great, and so they put it as part of the story. It's a literal add-in. It's a hey, this is consistent. This is consistent with Christian teaching, so we're going to keep it
in our earliest manuscripts and was added in at a later date. And if we can see that the gospel stories were edited after they were written down, there's no reason to think that they couldn't be edited before they were written down as oral traditions too, as well as the entire ending of Mark 16. There's a longer version, a shorter version, because the longer version simply isn't in our earlier manuscripts. These documents don't seem to have the historical reliability either. So in conclusion, I've probably spoken for too long here.
I don't like these speaking so fast. I know they have a fast forward, but I don't like this speaking so fast.
Are we talking about allegorical truth, moral truth, metaphorical, theological truth, historical truth? I suppose what I want to say to Dinesh is take your pick, and I'll probably have something to say about it.
All right. Here we go.
Okay. That was way too much crap, by the way. It was. Okay, Matthew 23. Let's see. Matthew 2:23. Let's go with the two. I'm going to go with the two Catholic ones. I always go to the Ecumenical Study Bible, and I always go to the U. Oh my crap! Anyway, I always go to the two academic ones. Let's go to two Catholic ones. I never go to the Catholic ones. I like the Catholic stuff. I'm Catholic after all. Okay, Matthew 2. Let's a lot of times these study Bibles skip the stuff where they're going to make themselves look like fools. So let's see. 2:23. Matthew 2. Is Matthew's infancy narrative historical? Well, there's a whole thing here. I don't know if we want to read that. Let's just see if I can find the actual notes. 2:15 out of Egypt. 2:16. 2:23. It is in here. Okay. An obscure Galilean village, nowhere mentioned in the Old Testament. Catholic Study Bible. It was insignificant in the eyes of many Jewish people. John 1:46. He shall be called a Nazarene. No Old Testament prophecy corresponds to this exact wording. Matthew apparently paraphrases the message of several prophets. Paraphrasing several prophets into a summary statement about the Messiah. The paraphrase is based on a word association between Jesus' home of Nazareth and the Hebrew word nester, translated as branch. In Isaiah 11:1, Isaiah used the image of a branch growing from a stump to signify hope for the kingdom of David, the great Davidic tree dynasty, but had been cut off since the exile. But the sprouting branch indicated that God would raise up another king from the hopeless situation. Later prophets used the same imagery to signify the Messiah king, Jeremiah 23:5, Jeremiah 33:14-16, who would build the temple, Zechariah 3:8, Zechariah 6:11-13. See more notes at Matthew 1:17 and Matthew 16:18 to read those notes, because I'm not going to read them on air. Hey, Shabam. Feel free to come in. Feel free to debate me or argue with me. I look forward to it, whether it's Islam or whether it's this debate. It's all good. Go buy the St. Ignatius. Is it St. Ignatius? Yeah. Go buy the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible New Testament, 2nd edition. But hold on. Wait. Let's see how the Oxford one handles the same information. Where are we? Matthew 2:23. Matthew 2:23. Let's see. Matthew 2:23. There we go. Matthew. Matthew 2. Okay. Matthew 4. Matthew 1. Matthew 3. Where's Matthew 2:23? Okay, Matthew 2:23. The first two chapters of Matthew's gospel are like a prologue. You know what? I might read that other portion. Why not? It's like a prologue to a great drama, sounding major themes that will be played out in the rest of the story. In this way, the evangelist or gospel writer alerts the reader to the particular tones he will give in his portrayal of Jesus. The Jewish heritage of Jesus is stressed in the very first line. Okay, 2:23. Yeah, okay, here we go. Very first lines of the gospel. He is the son of David, the son of Abraham. And his messianic lineage is traced through Jewish history from Abraham to Joseph, the husband of Mary. Explicit quotations from the Old Testament are augmented by numerous allusions to Old Testament figures and events. For instance, the hostility of Herod recalls the rage of Pharaoh against the Israelites, the insistence of the reference to a star recalls the prophecy of Balaam. Let's see. Who was the guide to the whole family? Okay. Is reminiscent of Joseph, who was also a dreamer, the one who rescued Israel in Egypt during a time of famine and distress. In all these ways, Matthew proclaims something that echoes throughout the gospel. Jesus is the promised Messiah, the one whom God's longed for salvation would be achieved. Thus, continuity with the Old Testament is stressed. So, Alex, although this one didn't really cover it as much, here's what you need to do, Alex. Throw away your degrees. They were worthless. Go buy this for $50, I think, on Amazon, and you'll get your answers. You're welcome.
If you don't mind, I'm going to stand up. Is that okay?
Please.
Okay.
Oh, what do I think about Hinduism? I love Hinduism. It's a beautiful religion. It's not one that I think of as true, but it is one that I do intend to cover on this channel. And I have read pretty much all the Hindu stuff I can find in English. I read most of it in college, and then I reread it or meant to reread it again later on. And hopefully one day I'll reread it again, or just buy audiobooks and listen to it. But I read through all the Hindu scripture stuff that I could find in English years ago, like 15, 20 years ago.
I'm standing up because I want to
This is such a bad move. This was such a bad move.
kind of neutralize Alex's accent advantage.
That was such a bad joke and such a bad move. He should not have done this. This was so stupid.
I mention this because it seems to me no accident that so many of the prominent so-called new atheists have British accents.
New atheists don't. The new atheism is dead. Bringing this up dates you so bad.
I think this is really important to their credibility because think of it, if Hitchens and Dawkins and Alex were three Southern boys from Louisiana, would they have quite the same impact? I'm not sure. Anyway.
It's a Southern boy from Texas. Fuck you.
This is why I'm standing. I was a little puzzled about this topic and kind of how to get at it.
Although, Alex does have way more subscribers than I do. So.
Because I've never debated this topic before. I'm not a theologian. I wouldn't even say I'm an expert in the Bible. I'm, I think, a believing and intelligent Christian. And
I mean, he's two of those things. I don't know about all three, but he's definitely two of them.
So I have done a bunch of debates over the existence of God, over can God...
Yeah, but has he won any of them? I won my debates. You can go find them on YouTube. I've won most of my debates. This guy hasn't.
God's omnipotence and benevolence be reconciled with evil in the world. Those topics appear to be philosophical topics. But when you're dealing with the Bible, you have a different kind of a work altogether. And I say this because in discussing if something is true or false, you have to ask, what is it that the book is doing? Like, what's its purpose? What is it there for? Let's take an example of what I mean. Let's say if we were debating, is Shakespeare's Julius Caesar true?
Why? Why? Just why? Look, deconstruct, okay? Dinesh is not off his rocker here trying to make this comparison. There is an angle here. Angle one, saying that Shakespeare is not true is dumb. It is true to the human experience. Shakespeare is more true than reality, but it's still not reality. Problem number one. Problem number two. You can say, well, are the writings and histories of Julius Caesar true? Not did Julius Caesar exist, but are the histories that we accept of Julius Caesar true? Are the writings by Caesar himself, which are propaganda, are they true? Are the writings of Plutarch about his life, are they true? Are the writings of the 12 Caesars, right? Suetonius, considering how over-dramatized all that is that true? So if none of the events that are described are actually true, they're all written way after, but we consider them history, and we don't question that it's history, why would we then not identify the gospel lives, which are the same thing as the Greek lives of Plutarch or the lives of Caesar, same style of writing? Why wouldn't we accept this as history? We accept that as history. He could say that. What he can't do is say half a sentence, move on to another point, and try to justify the Bible through Shakespeare. Let me use fiction to justify what I consider history.
True or false? Now, Julius Caesar is a historical account. This is not one of Shakespeare's works of fiction. It's a historical
drama. Just because the play is historical fiction doesn't make it historical. You're putting too much emphasis on the first word and forgetting the second word, which means fiction.
Drama.
Drama means fiction. Drama means fiction. Dramatization means it's no longer accurate to the historical record.
But because Shakespeare's interest is in drama, he emphasizes drama.
So, De Souza, are you saying that the gospel writers were interested in drama? No, that's the wrong way to go. That's the wrong way to go. You could argue they're interested in theology, so what they're doing is theology, so it's theologically true. Fine. What they're interested in is in morals, so it's morally true. Fine. What they're interested in is relating the story in a way that's relatable to its audience, so it's relative to the audience that it's speaking and relatable, but it's reporting a retelling of true facts. Okay. But you got to pick one. You can't pick all of them and throw them out there and say, pick which one you want. So that way it satisfies your question.
Dramatic events and dramatic confrontation. He does not actually worry about trivial details, anachronisms.
Great news, people. I'm going to tell a story about Abraham Lincoln, but I'm not going to worry about anachronisms. My Abraham Lincoln drives a Mustang with a drop top. It's an American car, and my president is an American president, so I just really need it to be. I really need this part of the message to be true. Dinesh, why? Why, Dinesh?
If an event occurs over here, Shakespeare does not hesitate to pull it in over here because of the dramatic impact is more powerful this way. And so imagine if someone were to come along and say, well, this is untrue, because when one of the...
There are plenty untruths in Shakespeare. I can't remember which version he's using for his... I know I've read it before. I know I have the book. What is he using? What is Shakespeare using for his... I have a source book on Shakespeare, too. Anyway. Is it Livy? Is he using Livy? Is he using Livy? Is Shakespeare using Livy? I think Shakespeare's using Livy.
One of the conspirators shows up to commit the crime. He is, according to Shakespeare, wearing a handkerchief. Well, handkerchiefs didn't really exist in the time of Julius Caesar. This is obviously something Shakespeare got right out of Shakespearean England, stuck it right in there, didn't care about doing that because his purpose is something else, to explore the nature of tyranny, for example. And so to bring...
So, Dinesh, answer your own question. What are the Gospels exploring? Are the Gospels exploring different things? And if the Gospels are more concerned with what they're exploring, how can we claim they are true? It's not that this is an incorrect argument, is that this is the incorrect argument to respond to the question that was asked.
The lens of saying this is anachronistic, well, you may or may not be right, but you're like missing the point of the whole book.
Erase everything you said and say you're missing the point of the book if you're asking the question this way.
And you're also missing the point of the author, and you're missing the point of the reader. Meaning the author...
Why did he say that? And you're missing the point of the reader. Why did he say that? Okay, it's fine.
The author's intention is not to worry about whether or not people in ancient Rome used handkerchiefs. The point of the author is to dramatize something about the essence of tyranny and conspiracy, and maybe the conflict between tyranny and freedom. And readers of the work, understanding that, have always taken it in that spirit.
Good news. I know you were wondering, what is Dinesh good at? Apparently, he's an expert in how different cultures and communities have interpreted the Bible throughout time, specifically the Gospels. He must have piles and piles of books. Piles of books on explaining from first-hand perspective how different Christians throughout time have interpreted the Bible. But I got a feeling.
So As I listen to Alex, I think to myself,
what a wonderful world.
let's think about the Bible, what kind of a book it is. Well, first of all, it is a book that exists sort of within a tradition and within a church.
The Bible is a library. It's actually Matt Whitman has a great explanation about this. Like there's like these little like amphoras, these little like jars, vases where they would put different. That's such a terrible hand gesture. They put different scriptures, not all of which we accept today, in there, and you pull it out. The Bible is a collection of these scriptures, of these holy works, some of which have been lost, some of which have been compiled or recompiled, or different versions have been compiled together to we got the version that we have today because there's different takes on it, different understandings of it. And it's a collection of these books and it's different anthologies, different compilations of these books. And the ones that are different are synthesized into one single book. Is this the version that we got? And it tells the story of the Jewish people. It's not the story of God, it's the story of the Jewish people. Start to end, whether it's Christian or Jewish, it's the story of the Jewish people.
Church. I mean, there was no Bible for 300 years. Right? The early Christians get together in the 4th century. They put the Bible together. Now, there's already a flourishing church. In fact, right about that time, the Roman emperor will convert to Christianity. Christianity will become the state religion of Rome. And the Bible will become, this assembled Bible will become the handbook of this church. And so it is to this day. Now, that's one point. The second point is that the Bible is a very strange book to be asking this kind of a question about, because the Bible nowhere admits the legitimacy of this kind of inquiry. It's worth noting. The Bible is a book of declaration, I would say of revelation. It never tries to prove anything. It could, but with very rare exceptions.
So, the church came before the Bible. That's true. Did the tradition come before the church, though? That's an interesting question.
Exceptions, and even those exceptions are generally kind of feeble. It is a book of sort of bold proclamation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
I'm going to let it go this time.
Boom. It's declared as something true. Now, I want to reflect on that for a moment. Before I do, let me say, if you think about that sentence by itself, it's a puzzle. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Obviously, somebody is writing this. But who? No one was there, except God. And yet, the sentence does not say, in the beginning, I created the heavens and the earth. There's apparently an observer. And the observer is recording, and God is, in fact, in the narrative. God is.
I'm not going to get up and go to my Torahs that are in 4 rooms away from me. Well, there are different ways to write that intro. There are just different ways to interpret it, different ways to write it. Dinesh.
God is, in fact, the subject of it. In the beginning, God created the heavens. heavens and the earth. So as I think about this statement, I think that first of all, it is an astounding claim, completely counterintuitive. And by counterintuitive, I mean, well, I get most of my intuitions from Aristotle. Aristotle using
it's counterintuitive, meaning it doesn't make sense. Get most of my intuitions from Aristotle, meaning a pagan. Just hot dog it, man. Where is it?
you could call it philosophical common sense, says the universe has always been around. It's always been here. You don't need an explanation for how it got started because it never got started. It's always existed. And the Greeks also believed, as you probably know, out of nothing can come nothing. So therefore, if you first had nothing, how can you get a universe? The Bible goes again.
We knew that the shaving industry was sort of in.
And states categorically, as a matter of fact.
Okay. There's a lot to unwrap there, and I don't think I have the patience, and no one's in here helping me out. So I don't know if I have the patience to unwrap everything, but that's just a little bit. First off, the Jewish Old Testament was not arguing against Greek pagan theodicy. It just wasn't. We don't even know if there was trade or interaction between ancient Israel and ancient Greek at that time. First off, you got ancient Mycenaean Greek, which is a completely different culture than Hellenistic Greek. Fine. You know that the Greeks, the Mycenaeans, were in and trading with Hetia at the port of Troy. And you know that the Carthaginians, in their proto form, in Tyre, in Phoenicia, would have been interacting with the Israelites, the pre-Hebrew Israelites, the pre-Israelites, the pre-Hebrew Israelites, or the pre-Israelite Hebrews, whatever. So they're interacting. And there is trade going on between Hetia and Egypt, and there's war going on between them, there's conflict. So there's a possibility that Proto-Greek ideas, which didn't yet exist, were being contemplated by some Jewish traders, but not likely, considering this is pre-Davidic kingdom. Of course, that's if you're taking the literal dating interpretation of the layers of unwrapping you have to do to make sense out of what the Sousa is saying, and to make it a strong enough statement that you can use it to argue against Alex. And not even, Alex only asked a question. So you're arguing against a question. You're not even arguing against a statement. So you're arguing against a presumption. You're arguing against a presumption with a presupposition, which I think is already problematic because now you're on really shaky ground on probability. Continuing.
That first there was nothing, and then there was a universe because God made it. So there are some factual assertions here.
Hold on. That is so bad. Where's my theogony? I need my theogony. Need my theogony. Where do I have it? Where are you? Where are you? Where's my theogony? I need you, my friend. Limes, Greek, Cicero. I don't need Cicero. I need. Here we go. Okay. Squeeze me for 1 second, please. Dinesh. I'm talking to you, Dinesh. I'm not talking to anyone else who's going to watch this stream. This is Hesiod. This is theogony. First came the chasm, the void, and then broad-breasted earth, secure seat forever, and all the immortals who occupy the peak of snowy Olympus, the misty Tartarus, in a remote recess of the broad path earth, and Eros, the most handsome among the immortal gods, dissolver of flesh, who overcomes the reason and purpose of the breast of all gods and men. Out of chasm came Eberus, the dark night, and from night in turn came bright air and day, who she bore in shared intimacy with Eberus. Earth bore first all one equal to herself, starry heaven, so that he should come over her and about her. To be a secure seat forever for the blessed gods, she bore the long mountains, pleasant haunts of the goddesses, the nymphs who dwell in the mountain gleens. And she bore also the undraining sea and its furious swell. Not in union of love, but then bedding with heaven, she bore deep swirling Oceanus. I can go on. Eventually, humans get made. Now, first come the Cyclopses. That's important. Then the giants. Then let's see. Let's see. Eventually, one of the gods' genitals get cut off, and that produces more creatures, sea creatures, sea monsters. Night is eventually born, Nyx, who I'm a big fan of. And then comes Nereus and the seas and Oceanus. Let's talk about where are my people? Let's see. Eldest daughter of Oceanus. Styx is born. Phoebe is born. Hestia is born. Kronos swallows them. Let's see. Zeus gets tricked. I just want to know. I want you to tell me, Dinesh. At what point is this refuted by your argument? Your beautiful, lovely argument. At what point? And then, worse, you're going to argue later that the Old Testament is not equivalent to the New Testament in truth. So then why are you fighting so hard for the truth of statements that you yourself don't agree with? Unless you agree with them, which in that case, you're a liar because you then act like you don't agree with them when you get called out.
The assertion that the universe had a beginning, the assertion that the universe,
in
a sense, came out of nothing, and of course, the assertion that the universe was created by God. So we can, if we want to go down this road, I'm not going to do it right now, explore whether this astounding claim that was made by the ancient Jewish writers with no evidence at all, no empirical investigation, no scientific experiment,
no evidence, no evidence at all, no scientific investigation. We have everything beginning out of chaos and void and chasm. Mother humper.
To measure the redshift of galaxies. Nevertheless, the ancient Hebrew writer says, we know this to be true because God told us.
Nevertheless, we know this to be true because Hesiod wrote it. Because the gods, the muses themselves, talked to Hesiod after he said a prayer.
And now here we are, more than 2,000 years later, really more like 3,000 years later, and we're in a position to ask, is this claim true?
Is this claim
I'll
true?
defer that. I'm happy to discuss that, and we probably will.
I'm happy to discuss that, and we probably will.
This is one way to think about whether what the Bible says is true. It's making these categorical assertions.
Making these category assertions.
And most of these assertions, I would argue, are in the domain of revelation. The Bible is, in fact, a revelation. A revelation.
Dinesh, this is 100% a revelation. Cleo literally spoke to Hesiod and inspired him to write this poem. The muses themselves, the daughters of Zeus, explained to Hesiod through inspiration the truth of creation. Not just creation of man, but the creation of the gods. Of course, earth was created, and of course, earth gave birth to heaven, and of course, earth and heaven had children, and those are the gods. Now, you might argue they're not the one true God because someone had to create that beforehand, but still, you have revelation right here, Dinesh. I can do the same trick with any ancient mythology. What are you doing, man? Genesis is written as a polemic against the other cultures. It's there to say what the Jewish people are not. It's there to show that the other cultures are wrong in their understanding. That's what it's there for. It's polemic.
right here we have a problem, because how does
You
one
think?
approach a revelation philosophically? Alex, you just tell me when I'm out of time. Okay, I'm just going to go until you stop me.
3 minutes, I think.
I'm okay?
3 minutes, listen.
We're 31 minutes into this. We're an
I got 3
hour
minutes.
and 50 some minutes into the stream.
Oh, wow. It's just getting started. All right. I'll say.
I mean,
some of my stuff, but let me just say this. What is the point of revelation at all? You know, we have a guy here who says he's a cosmic skeptic. Many of you probably think you're skeptics. And
Dinesh, you're a dick. Well, I guess you think you're an alpha. It's some kind of Roman centurion.
and so you might ask, well, why the heck do we need revelations? We have reason. Well, turns out that here we are, flung into the world. And if we reflect upon this fact and reflect upon our place in the world, several important questions pop out that are the inevitable result of reason, but which reason is utterly incapable of answering. Not that reason has an answer to date. Reason cannot answer. What are these questions? 1, why is there a world? 2, what is our purpose in it? Why are we here? 3, what happens after we die?
So again, people who watched my review, they got very confused when. So this is a real apologetical argument. There is a real argument that Jimmy Akin, Trent Horn, Gavin Ortland, James White, MacGyver, they all use. Okay? The problem is not that Dinesh is using this argument, is that he's arguing it poorly. He's not executing it well. He doesn't understand the fundamentals of the argument. And this argument doesn't apply to what he was saying. It actually goes counter to what he was saying. So either the Bible is 100% true, literal history, or it's not. And parts of it are literal and parts of it are not. And you need to way to distinguish between which is which. You got to talk about genres and talk about tropes and talk about all this other stuff and all this other groundwork that Dinesh never lays. He never establishes a foundation for the arguments that he's given. He just goes from argument to argument, from apologetical presupposition to apologetical presupposition without ever justifying anything that he's saying. And some of these assertions contradict each other dramatically.
4, is our passionate concern with justice, with morality, with goodness, that is constantly betrayed in the actual life of the world, ever cosmically vindicated after the world or beyond the world? So I could go on, but I'm giving you 4 straightforward questions that no intelligent person, I think, can avoid having to raise, and yet to which there is no available or even conceivable answer. It's not as if there's no answer, but we'll get an answer tomorrow. Because let me put it this way. Let's take the question about life after death. And I'll close on this and open the door to further inquiry. Let's talk about life after death. Is there life after death, yes or no?
No. Now what are you going to do? Now what are you going to do? All right. They answered no. Dinesh, what are you going to do? Why would you open the door in a debate on whether or not the gospel is true? Why would you open the door to metaphysics about what lies after death? It's not even relevant to what the gospel is saying, to what the Bible is saying. Why would you open this can of theological worms? Why? It has nothing to do with the question of, is the Bible true? The majority of the Bible doesn't have an afterlife. You have to assume or presume that the New Testament's understanding, specifically the understandings of Matthew and Luke and Revelation, are correct. I mean, this is bad. There's no strategy in anything that you're saying.
Shakespeare says that death is the undiscovered country. No.
Why are we back to Shakespeare? Why are we back to Shakespeare?
No traveler who has gone there has ever come back.
Except if you're going to argue for there being an afterlife, then you're going to have to use what little proof we have, which are near-death experiences and people who have been dead and come back for momentary deaths, whatever. You have to use near-death and temporary death or momentary death experiences to justify an afterlife in a tangible way. Otherwise, it's just pure speculation, and anything can be true. Why would you introduce such... I mean, Alex never hits you over the head with it, so it's fine. You got lucky. Chingo.
I think we probably have to agree with this. You might get some tiny hints from like near-death experiences, but by and large, we don't know. And not only do we not know, we have no way of knowing. The key point here is that probability, the absence of evidence is the evidence of absence. This is all gobbledygook.
Okay. I got my man's Hegel back here and my man's Sartre. Sartre. I like saying Sartre. Sorry. Sartre. Beingness, nothingness. Existentialism is a humanism. So there is no afterlife. There's nothing. Nothing matters. So therefore, everything matters. So therefore, you should be a good person because everything you do is the only thing you're ever going to do. I just gave you morality without there being to be religion, heaven, a God, anything. Why would you open the door to these kind of counters? Why would you do it? I don't understand why you would do this.
Because all of this is only based on prior experience. If you show me a guy and tell me he has 3 eyes, I won't believe you.
All of this is based on prior experience. You mean the way epistemology works? The way knowledge works? My crap, you can only know things that you already know. Did you know that if you put a turtle in front of you, it's walking, it doesn't stop walking. No matter how fast you run, you can never catch up to it. Have you heard this one?
Believe you. Because I've seen thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, and I've got a lot of experience, and based upon that, the probability that a guy can show up with 3 eyes may seem to me to be pretty low. But the question of life after death, if I think of an analogy for it, it's something more like the possibility of aliens. It's not even an exact analogy, but it's a similar analogy because if I say to Alex, you believe in aliens, there's no probabilistic way to say, yes, we have nothing in our experience to go this way or that way. And here's my point.
Mathematically, billions, trillions of stars. I forget what the chaos theory number is, but something. One in every something has to have something. Space bacteria, mathematical probability, reason alone. There's a million reasons. There's at least 3 reasons to believe there's alien life. I don't believe in aliens now. You have me defending aliens, Dinesh.
It is exactly when reason not only breaks down, but reason like can't even go there, that revelation steps in and delivers an answer. And here we are, like
I feel like he had an aneurysm. He died, came back to life, and was like, "What?"
debating, is that answer true? And the question I want us to think about, at least to get started tonight, with what
To get started, 36 minutes in.
tools are you going to deliver a true or false verdict on subjects that are outside the domain of reason itself? I mean, Immanuel Kant says on the first page of the Critique of Pure Reason, before we discuss the great reach.
I'm bringing Kant into this because why not? We already brought in Shakespeare and Julius Caesar, and we haven't even started. And you're filibustering yourself.
Whether we discuss whether this is reasonable or that's not reasonable and whether this is empirical, because we first got to set the boundaries of reason. What is it that reason can and cannot know? Why? Because what Kant is basically getting at is that once you go beyond the reach of reason, faith is not unreasonable at all. Why? Because you have nothing else. So what I want to emphasize here.
What does this have to do with a tangible book that is made up of 66 to 77 tangible books that were written by people in history who were living lives who had their own source of knowledge and their own sense of understanding of drama and irony and style and whatever else?
Here, and I'm happy to discuss all the specifics we've covered today, or Alex has covered today, but
Alex ain't covered shit. You're on your own. You're destroying Christianity and apologetics. Alex ain't done nothing. He asked like I don't know, 20 questions rapid fire. He gish galloped. He began with a gish gallop, dude. You should have called him out on the gish gallop.
But essentially, the Bible is something that is taught in church. It's a tool for ministry, for exhortation, to get people to live better lives, to help them deal with their life in the world. I have never heard a single pastor, for example, and I'm quite sure this doesn't happen in Jewish synagogues as well, going, you know what? Let's go out and find the Amalekites of our day and kill them right now. Nobody says that. No one even thinks that. No one reads.
Good news. No one misapplies passages of the Bible to do horrible things, like attack gay people, or throw rocks at people for being different, or make people conform, like men not wearing dresses, or women having to wear coverings. That never happens. Yet no one's taken the line. This blood be on their children and their children's children. No one's taken that line and abused it and misapplied it to people. Yeah. There's not a war currently going on in a country where people are taking the Jewish and Quranic interpretation of whose land belongs to who over literally and fighting and killing each other over. Nope, that's not happening.
Reads the passage that way. Nobody reads the passage of the fall in the way that Alex described it. And so we have a little bit of a problem.
I can't even remember how Alex described it at this point. This has been so much stupidity.
We got a book. It's a book
We got a book
within a community for a purpose that the community is extremely clear about. This book is used every single Sunday millions of times and all around the world.
Each book of the Bible was written for different communities at different times, at different places, by different writers, sometimes by different groups of writers, with different compilers and different editors. And some of those editors and compilers and writers went back to other passages and other writings and connected them to them. And they connected it to it as a way to assert their authority by connecting the previous authority, which other people agreed on, to their writing.
It's used in Protestant and Catholic churches. Obviously, there are interpretive communities that differ on how things can be read and understood. There's also the whole separate question of the relationship of the Old Testament to the New. There's an old saying that goes that
you're going to drop the ball on later in this debate.
New Testament is in the Old concealed. The Old Testament is in the New revealed. So the Old Testament and the New exist in a kind of odd relationship to each other. In fact,
again, that is a real thing that apologists and theologians really do say. But either Dinesh doesn't understand it or he understands it and he's going to purposely misapply it.
So odd that one party, the Jews, repudiates the relationship altogether. And from the Christian point of view, the Old Testament is incorporated.
Sorry, someone replied and I'm not watching. I'm sorry. Oh, Dr. Kip, I'm so sorry you're watching this right now. I started off watching some Muslim stuff, and then I was like, you know what, I'm going to skip to this, and this is so bad. This is so bad. I have read so many study Bibles from so many different denominations, and Dinesh just gets all their arguments wrong. Every argument that I've ever bought into, he mentions it and then somehow messes up the wording. It's so bad.
But superseded by the New, and there are different ways of looking at that relationship, which we can get into.
For you.
Let me just close by saying this.
Rather long 3 minutes there.
Oh, it's a rather long 3 minutes.
It's maybe meant for you to finish soon in the way that Jesus promised.
No. Let me pause right here because
an ambiguous soon. But I'd love to question you on some of the things you've already said.
All right,
don't mind.
We will put the ball in your court. So I think what's going to happen now is we're going to go into discussion.
Hope so.
Right? Okay, and you're going to ask me some questions. We'll discuss, and I'll ask you some.
Sure, and I'm happy to essentially take the things that I said in my opening statement and slot them in and apply them to the things that you just said right there. So you began by.
I'm going to take the things that I asked that I probably forgotten at this point, and I'm going to slot them into your ridiculous statements. Rock on.
By saying that the Bible is a strange book to ask these questions of because of its purpose. I assume you'd agree with me that the Bible is a collection of books rather than a singular text. With
all he has to do is say yes. All D'Souza has to do is say yes and shut up. Let's see how he does.
Different authors, different intentions, and most importantly, different genres. So the first question I suppose I'd like to ask you is, do you agree, for example, that at least some biblical texts are attempts at historical biography, such as in the Gospels?
Of course, I would agree with that. But let me just qualify it.
Stop talking. Sure. No. Just agree. You're fine.
When we think of the Bible as revealed, the question now becomes, what do we mean? Did God write the book? Did God inspire the book? And human beings?
Good news. There's a chance D'Souza believes God physically wrote the Bible.
Wrote it. Did God show human beings?
There was a time when I barely knew how to turn.
There's a time I barely knew how to read. D'Souza's making me want to go back to that time.
They then described in their own words. Okay, so the reason these things are important is it seems to me, to answer the question I raised earlier about in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, the way I understand it is there's a perfect revelation shown to a God.
Which is not the best translation, but if you're going to go with that translation, you need to justify it, and you don't.
Gospel to a Bible to a Jewish scribe who sees it, so to speak, but writes it in his own words. When I look at the book of Revelation, same thing.
And does it get anything wrong? Do the scribes get anything wrong?
It's quite possible.
Do the scribes get anything wrong? How many better answers are there than what he's going to say?
possible that they, when you say get anything wrong, they are writing it in human terms. I mean, you know.
I mean the specifically mundane human things. I'm not talking about when the author of Genesis says that God created the heavens and the earth, or talks about the spirit moving across the face of the water. This is clearly mythological. This is clearly an attempt at mythological writing. That's fine. It would be silly to ask if that's true or not. But when somebody,
I don't think
He just threw you a lifeline, Dinesh. He just threw you a lifeline. Take the fucking lifeline. Take the lifeline. Take the raft boat.
it is mythological writing at all. I think that it is simply, I mean, put it this way.
There are papal decrees that use the word mythology, that use the word mythos, that use the word myth to describe this portion of the Bible. Papal decrees. These are people whose whole life depends on the Bible being true, and they are willing to admit mythology is being used. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm healthy. I'm okay. It's fine. I'm going to survive this. This is good. Here we go. I'm going to read this comment for those who are going to watch later. D'Souza's performance in this event helps us to understand how a man is actually stupid enough to get behind a movie as idiotic as 2,000 Mules. There you go.
we were in the year 4000 BC, if we were John the Divine, and let's just say that God showed us in a vision the actual end of the world, right? Apocalypse. We would then write down the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
You know what's weird, and this is actually maybe sad on my part. When he got into this, I got excited because when I was in junior high and high school, mostly junior high, the one book that I would read over and over again was Revelation. I loved Revelation. I would read it almost every week. I thought it was great. I was so excited for it. So when he mentioned this, I was like, "We're gonna go somewhere. Don't worry, he's gonna bring it back." I was wrong. I was very wrong. He did not bring it back.
Death and famine and destruction. We're not engaging in myth making at all. I'm actually writing. Actual end of the world, right? Apocalypse. We would then write down the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, death and famine and destruction. We're not engaging in myth making at all.
We're going to mention the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but we're not, keyword here, not engaging in myth making at all. We're referencing mythological, typological figures, iconic figures from different writings, and we're applying them to a story, to a narrative. But we're not myth building. Though we're going to do exactly what matches the definition of myth building.
I'm actually writing what I see.
So you think there'll be a 7-headed demon?
Of course not. I'm saying
no, Dinesh, if you're going to go this hard, you say yes. If you're going to go this hard, you say yes. You say there's going to be a literal fucking dragon. I'm just going to fuck things up. You're going to go this hard. You say yes.
I'm saying that to me, what I'm seeing is so, let's just say, for example, it is a thermonuclear explosion of a kind that the.
For my audience that's going to watch this tomorrow morning, a book that every church father I've ever read, every pope I've ever read, every study Bible I've ever read says it's using analogy and metaphor. Dinesh is gonna make literal. My God.
That the ancient Bible writer doesn't even know what it is, right? And the consequence of it is death and destruction and famine. He's going to write it down the way he sees it.
But where's he going to get the 7-headed dragon and the prostitute from?
This is his
like a human attempt to describe a nuclear reaction.
Yes, because when words and images.
Good news. Nero doesn't matter. Christians being lit up as Roman candles doesn't matter. The suffering of our earliest martyrs doesn't matter. The fact that Christians use the martyrdom of the early Christians to help prove the authenticity of not only the martyrdoms told of the apostles, but of the lineage that connects them to the earliest church fathers that we know were real, doesn't matter, because Dinesh, my brother, has no understanding of literary tropes.
Fail. Metaphor is the actual conduit to truth.
Now, I'd understand if that were the case, if you said that perhaps after a nuclear blast, somebody describes it as, the gods of fire descending upon man with their flaming swords or something.
I bring this up all the time. I don't know if anyone listening to this now or listening to it later is gonna know this reference, but Orson Welles, the man who saw tomorrow, starts describing the future of 1979 or 1976, whenever the show originally came out. I watched it in the 80s, and it was talking about New York and the missile hitting New York and all that kind of stuff that now we can reinterpret into 9/11 and all that kind of stuff. Okay. I want to know, for the sake of my own sanity, how Dinesh would handle watching Orson Welles narrate that part today.
Or something like that, but like a prostitute and a seven-headed dragon?
Well, first of all, I'm not saying it is a nuclear explosion. The problem is we're given this admittedly phantasmagorical future account, right?
Sure.
It's
Phantasmagorical. Phantasm. Magical. Fantastic, fantasy, phantasm, magical account of the future. The future of 70 to what? 250 AD?
And it is so wrenching and powerful that many
Dionysian, Nero. Weren't there persecutions right before Constantine? Or actually during Constantine? Didn't one of his co-councils like hate Christians?
Many people, for example, have tried to render it by art. And it's not easy to do it, right? It's not easy to do it because we have...
For those playing at home, and who somehow make it this far into this video, when I re-upload it later tomorrow and I set the graphics and all the kind of cool stuff. The book of Revelation is talking about the early Christian persecutions, and it's a letter of hope to the Christians suffering under these persecutions. And it's either a later persecution pointing back to an earlier persecution, or it's written during the persecution. And from the perspective of the Christians, it's a total persecution. But from the perspective of history, it's a localized persecution, which is fine. All that works fine if you actually read it and you deconstruct, peel back all the information. It's all right there. Dinesh is saying that it is talking about the future. Not the near future, not the future that the Christians are concerned about because the world's about to end, but the future for us. You can't. You could say parts of implied prophecy hasn't been fulfilled, and so that's the future for us. But direct allegories to Rome, using the word Babylon, direct allegories to the trade nations that they're working with, direct allegories to events that happened in ancient Rome. Well, for us, ancient Rome, for them, modern Rome. I'm okay. I'm going to make it. 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 We're going to survive this.
We have to stop and realize, first of all, that we're dealing not only with the limitations of perception, but the limitations of language. Let me give you a simple example. I'm
going to go 1 hour more. I'm going to go till 1 o'clock my time. Okay, so we got a little less than an hour to go.
From India. I have never eaten a mushroom. Okay? I ask you, Alex, what does a mushroom taste like? Sure. I would submit that you would be completely unable to render to me in words, however lengthy and ornate, what a mushroom actually tastes like.
That may be true, but I was asking, for example, about Jesus' presentation at the Temple of Jerusalem after his birth. This is not like trying to describe a mushroom or the end of the world.
No. Okay, so now let's talk about that.
Hold on a second. This is a historical event that's being recorded by one New Testament writer at the same time as another New Testament writer says that the family had traveled to Egypt. I don't think this is an attempt at metaphor or allegory, as I would say of Genesis. Whether you think that is or not, I would say that in the case of the Gospels, we can agree that in at least some instances, this is a clear attempt at mundane history. This is not an attempt at writing some kind of metaphor to explain a truth that's otherwise unknowable to the human mind. It's a very straightforward attempt to record what actually happened, and they contradict each other.
They contradict each other because they're written by 4 different people.
Sure.
Okay. Now stick to that answer.
Let me ask you this. If God were writing it, I'm quite sure he would have written it once. You would need 4.
Sure.
Okay?
So some of them are wrong then?
No. Okay, so when you say they're wrong, let's consider Luke's gospel for a minute. Luke is a medical doctor. Luke is...
So the first time I watched this, this is where I turned it off. This is where I turned it off the first time I watched it. And then I came back to it and it was gone. And I had to wait a few days to finish. Okay. So for the sake of argument, let's pretend that Luke was written by Luke. Let's just pretend it's not an anonymous work. For the sake of argument. The idea that Luke was a physician and a doctor. So you're using later church fathers' accounts to justify this. Except you have the Lucian school that it probably developed out of. So you're saying that he was a doctor based on implications in the New Testament and by the early church fathers. Except if it wasn't written by Luke. If it wasn't written by Luke, and we're just ascribing it to Luke, what happens to your argument? Now you're using church father and oral tradition, but you yourself are not Catholic, so you don't have holy tradition to rely on. You can't say you're Orthodox or Catholic, so you can't say that holy tradition is guiding you. And this is a non-biblical source you're citing for Luke to be a doctor, let alone for Luke to be the author of Luke. So how can you, a Protestant, affirm a tradition that you consider apocryphal?
Is not present at the events being described. Luke is virtually in the position of Thucydides writing the Peloponnesian War. Now, Thucydides did fight in the war, but in most of the events described by Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War, he wasn't there.
Making them very unreliable, right?
No, on the contrary. It is, in fact, the most reliable account of the Peloponnesian War that historians have.
Let's not say that it is reliable, though.
No, it is. What I'm trying to say is that when you're
The semantics here. The most reliable account versus a reliable account. Nobody put D'Souza in that situation where he got called out on his semantics. D'Souza put himself in that situation. It's not the devil. It's not a demon. It's not Alex O'Connor being clever or smart. It's D'Souza not being careful with his words.
When you're talking about historicity, and you're talking about historicity now in the ancient world, you have to recognize that these people are not approaching it as modern historians. Look,
And again, this is a fine argument to have if you're not going to contradict your own argument with arguments that work against it. You can make these claims, but you can't make all of them.
Luke is going around interviewing people.
So let me ask this very, very straightforwardly then.
Okay.
Luke says that after the birth of Jesus, the family fled to Egypt. Matthew says that they went to the Jerusalem temple. Are they both correct, or is one of them wrong?
Who the heck cares? I mean, look.
Well, I do, and so.
Well, you do, but let me say why what you care about is not only trivial, but indicates a kind of unwillingness to try to get what the text is trying to
I'll
communicate.
tell you why I don't think it's trivial. Because I think that the reason why Luke may have invented the flight to Egypt, he tells us. Luke says, when he records the flight to Egypt, and then they return from Egypt, he says, this is so that we can fulfill the prophecy from Hosea chapter 11, out of Egypt I shall call my son. Now,
Correct.
In Hosea, God is talking here about the nation of Israel. At least in this case, unlike the Matthew prophecy, the prophecy.
And as I said in my video reviewing this is recontextualization. We are recontextualizing the Bible through the lens of Jesus. Whether you want to believe that Jesus really did the recontextualizing, or if it was the authors themselves who were doing the recontextualizing, or the audience, the writers who were writing for the audience, or the group that was resculpting these stories that were told about Jesus into the narratives that we have, the four surviving narratives. They made these changes to make theological points. And you have to admit that if you're going to be honest. Otherwise, you're lying.
Prophecy actually exists and we can interrogate it. It seems to me like what Luke is doing here is attempting to display Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. And in fact, he tells us that that's what he's doing. Therefore, if it is the case that Jesus didn't go to Egypt and didn't come out of Egypt on his return, then this would undermine Luke's attempts to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. That's why I think it is relevant.
Well, look.
And not trivial.
Right, but I think that the...
Would you agree with that? I mean, do you think it's a completely trivial point? If it's so trivial,
no, I think that the point, as you stated it before, is trivial. The point you're now raising is not trivial, but the point you're now raising is one in which you have 3 centuries of Jewish-Christian disputation about whether Jesus is the Messiah, okay? And by and large, the disputation breaks down in this way. The Jews are the biblical literalists, and the Christians are the...
Wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. I have plenty of Jewish commentary, different Jewish commentators, ancient Jewish commentators, medieval Jewish commentators. They're not all literalist, or if they are being literal, as in staying true to the letter of the word, they are still using spiritual and allegorical understandings. If you read the midrashes, or you read the was it the Rashish, the Rasha, whatever. Read the Talmud. Just read the Talmud.
The sort of metaphorical readers. And I say this because...
Or read any Kabbalistic commentary. Or go read Dennis Prager. Go read Dennis Prager. Tell me how literal he is to the Christian understanding, because I guarantee you, a Jewish man does not have the same understanding of these passages as the Christians do.
Let's take a very famous passage that bears on this very topic, where Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. And the Jews go, you said the temple would be destroyed. Now, interestingly, Jesus did say the temple would be destroyed, and the temple was in fact destroyed in 70 AD. In fact, 40 years after Jesus said that, the temple was in fact physically razed to the ground, and the Jews dispersed in a huge diaspora. But my point is, Jesus doesn't reply that. Jesus doesn't say, hey, listen, wait 40 years. Jesus says, no, you're misreading me completely. When I said the temple, I was actually speaking of the temple of my body.
He doesn't tell them that.
But this is stated.
We're told that that's what he means.
We're told that's what he means. So what I'm getting at is here you have a case where you have an event, you have a Jewish literalist reading and a Christian metaphor.
Jewish people weren't all literalists. There are multiple Jewish traditions, multiple Jewish explanations, multiple Jewish communities. They're not a monolith. You racist.
Metaphorical reading. Yeah. Another example, and
So would you say then flight to Egypt is a metaphor? Is that what you're trying to say? In other words, I'm trying to understand what it is that you're doing here to actually answer the question that I'm asking you. Which is about, because here's my theory, here's an idea.
Okay.
Luke, the author of Luke, invents the flight to Egypt in order to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, meaning that
Fair opinion. Christian answer, I believe it happened. Prove it. I can't. I'm doing it on faith. Okay, move on. Fine. How does D'Souza handle it?
that when we read Luke, we should note that where it appears that he's making historical claims, we should note his willingness to twist history in order to fulfill a theological
Well, you don't know if he's doing that. You're assuming that. This is your theory.
No. What I'm saying is that that's one thesis to explain the contradiction between Luke and Matthew. If you want to say that it's trivial, then fine, but we still have to explain how it comes about. And what I'm saying is one idea of how this comes about leads to us undermining our trustworthiness of Luke. What I'm asking...
This is your invitation to defend Luke.
You for is your explanation that would not lead to us having to undermine our the trustworthiness.
I don't have the ability to referee that passage. I'm not aware of this contradiction. I'll have to go back and look and see.
That's fine.
Go and
I'm not aware of this contradiction. I did no research, and I apparently never read the Bible.
Look it up. But what I am doing is I'm questioning your methodology and your kind of
O'Connor, Alex is saying the very things that a preacher or a pastor or a priest would say to his audience when pointing out what the Bible really means and what it's really saying. He is not attacking the text. He's not even attacking you. These are the questions that a priest or pastor will say. I'll say, hey, look, this is this complicated thing. This is your invitation to go deeper into the text and understand what it's really saying. O'Connor asking the same question as a way to point out the hypocrisy or the problems or the non-literal nature of this particular text is your invitation to go deeper into the text and to explain why his interpretation misses the point.
What would I call it? You got the Jews and the Christians arguing about events, and they're very complex events, and they're very powerfully meaningful events. Like, let's take, for example, Abraham and Isaac are going up the mountain. Mm-hmm. And Isaac said...
But what he asked you was, did Jesus really go to Egypt? Yes or no? How can you have two counter opinions telling two different stories where Jesus is in two different places at the same time? Did he bilocate? And your answer is, let's go to an even more controversial part where atheists disagree with the morality of the events. Because that'll help solve the problem.
Says to Abraham something to the effect of, where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says to him, God will provide. God will provide. Now, in the Jewish reading, this whole thing has got to be understood in terms of, here's Abraham.
The problem with this explanation is not that it's not a valid explanation, is that it's a misdirect from the question that was being asked.
Willing to sacrifice his son. God says, stop. It's a scale of obedience. In the Christian reading, it's not that, or it's not only that. The Christian reading is Jesus.
So you're going to try to explain typology. You're going to do so poorly because this is a prophecy or an event that's typologically pointing to Jesus, which is fine. This is a legit Christian argument that he really is giving, that he's referencing a real argument. But he's not answering the question about did Jesus go to Egypt or not, and does it matter?
Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So when Isaac says, "Where's the lamb?" and Abraham says, "God will provide," it is a foreshadowing of a significant event in the New Testament. Now, again, as I say, the Jews and the Christians argued this for 3 centuries and more. I'm not even trying to adjudicate who's right, but I'm saying you're waltzing in, coming.
You're a Christian. You're a Christian. You have to assume. You have to assume the Christian argument is right. Otherwise, why would you be a Christian?
Coming with neither of these two assumptions. In fact, I assume you think that the Old Testament is as mythological as the New.
No.
Okay.
Sorry, I need to
and I guess what I'm saying is that people who read the Bible to understand what the Bible is trying to say and what we can learn from it, do what the Jewish rabbis did and do what the...
If enough people watch this, I will do a part 2 tomorrow night. I wasn't going to stream tomorrow night, but if enough people watch this video, if I get 100 views by tomorrow afternoon, I will do the part 2 and I will finish this. I will finish this tomorrow night.
Theologians like Augustine and Anselm and so many others have done, they don't really do what you're doing, which is saying, hey, Luke must have talked to a guy who thought it happened over here, but in fact, this guy says the roof was thatched. But
that's not what O'Connor's doing. He asked you a question and you went to the binding of Isaac instead of answering directly, yes, they both happen. No, they didn't happen. No, one's true. No, the other one's false. Of all the ways you could answer, you didn't answer at all. And then you went to a more complicated problem. And now you're lost in the weeds of imaginary Jewish interpretations of a passage that's not interpreted the way that you're saying it's interpreted. That has nothing to do with the question that was being asked, that you're now reframing as a question about roof thatching.
But another guy says they let the guy in through the roof who had to be healed.
Which is a completely different story in the Bible, an event than the one that's being asked about.
Contradiction. Yep. And I'm like, is this your way of trying to say the Bible is not true?
Yes, it is. The Old Testament. Yes.
Okay.
It's precisely what I'm doing. The Old Testament is not fully mythological. I think Genesis is mythological. I think that Exodus makes more of an attempt at history, but has mythological undertones. I think that the military...
And again, something being factual or historical doesn't mean that it's true. You can write a history that's completely false or completely incorrect. You can have facts that are wrong. That doesn't mean you're lying. You could just be mistaken. The question of reliability has to do with what the Bible is trying to teach, and is it reliable in teaching that?
Military conquest.
And you have yet to identify what the Bible is trying to teach or what each individual book is trying to teach. So if you don't know its purpose, how can you know if it's properly expressing its function?
In my opening statements, our attempts at describing literal historical events. I think that Psalms are poetry. I think that Job is mythology. I don't think a man called Job actually existed, right? And so
he's literally giving you the answers you should have been giving him.
there are lots of different genres here. The reason I'm asking about the contradictions in the gospel, and I understand if you don't want to talk about the specific example of Egypt and Jerusalem, fine, whatever. Maybe you can send me an email about it later or something. That's fine. But the reason I bring it up is to say that there are lots of these, and in each case, if we try to look at why they might be contradicting each other, the reasons I think we're given tell us that the historicity of this text should be in dispute. For example, I mentioned the date of Jesus' death. The Synoptic Gospels specifically place this after the Passover meal. They have the Last Supper as the Passover meal.
Okay.
John uniquely sets it before the Passover because he has the theological purpose of wanting to.
And my answer would be that John changed it for a theological purpose.
Depicts Jesus as the
He's giving you the answer. He's doing your homework for you.
Passover lamb.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a contradiction if the Gospels are supposed to be historical accounts of what happened to Jesus, which I imagine if we were having a debate about whether Christianity were true, about whether the God of the Bible existed, you might put forward, say, an argument for the resurrection of Jesus. You might say, well, we have good historical evidence to think that Jesus rose from the dead, and you might point to the story of the crucifixion and the disciples seeing him after he died. This is a common thread. The problem is that if we're treating it as historical in an area like that,
he's literally helping you.
Then we have to engage with it as a historical text. Why would they contradict each other? I would say for the same reason.
He's trying to get you back on track so you can answer the fucking question.
That Luke contradicts Matthew in the birth narratives because they're attempting to make a theological point, which tells us at least, and maybe you think that the New Testament is an entirely theological and in no way a historical text. Would you agree?
I believe it's both theological and historical. Dinesh, don't let me down. And you're going to let me down.
At least that the New Testament writers are seemingly willing to adapt the historicity of an event in order to serve a theological point. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I would agree that.
Just say yes. And let Alex get as mad as he wants to get. Let him get red in the face, arguing with you that makes it not true. And then you sit there calmly dismantling his worst claim, his most emotional outburst that doesn't make sense. You attack that and you stay quiet as he gets mad at you for you saying that what is metaphysically true is true in real life. Let him get mad and strategically attack his weakest point. Or do a Jimmy Aiken and say, see, we don't disagree because we're agreeing here. But instead of doing jiu-jitsu and instead of boxing, you waffle.
Well, that definitely is a contradiction.
Well, it's not a contradiction because, well, I mean, Thucydides is relaying historical events to make a moral point about the nature of politics, and both are completely consistent with each other. Sure. It's not as if Thucydides is, so he's a student of power politics. He is making a point. His speeches are driven at making a point.
This question and debate is not about Thucydides, who is the second most boring book I've ever read. The most boring book I've ever read, if you can diatribe, I can diatribe, is The Count of Antaranto. The second most boring book I've ever read is The Peloponnesian War.
But the point is excavated out of the actual events. Now, I think that there's a reason that we're given for perspective.
Okay, Dinesh, let's go down this rabbit hole for a second. So if a scholar comes along, like scholars have come along, and they say the way that it's described in the Peloponnesian War is not what actually happened. Did Thucydides get a fact wrong? I understand. The Peloponnesian War really took place. Thucydides, we assume, is a real person. The characters in the story really were there. The mythology that they give to Lycurgus, we can even argue, is true. That Lycurgus's law codes and everything that is told is true. Okay. But when a battle or a group is described or a platoon or a squad is described in the Peloponnesian War, and specific things happen in a specific order to get a specific result. And the history doesn't support that, even though the war really did happen, and really though the circus is a real person, and really though Thucydides is a real soldier who fought in the war. All of that. Is it Lycurgus? I might be saying the wrong name. Whoever's the king in the Peloponnesian War. Am I grabbing the Peloponnesian War? I don't want to grab the Peloponnesian War right now. Anyway, no, I think Lycurgus is a different guy. I think that's the one who founded the law codes, the original law codes for Sparta. Anyway, no, it is Lycurgus. Crap. Hold on. I'll be back. Don't go anywhere. My books are right here. Here, look. So you don't think I'm just walking away from you. Proof that I read it. Look at how broken that spine is. Oh, okay. So, oops. You know, I actually performed the speech from this book one time. I think I even put it on YouTube. I like anyway. Okay. So let's just assume Thucydides where's the I like it when they have a little outline of events. You know what I mean? It just helps. Because you have the plague, right? And you have the king dying in the plague. And you have this great speech, the speech, okay? And everybody knows that the speech isn't really the speech that was really spoken. So you have to ask the question, Dinesh, if the speech isn't real, did it happen? If the speech isn't real, if it's completely made up, did the speech happen? It's a very simple question. Where is it? Where is the speech of Pericles? There we go. Pericles' funeral orientation. There we go. That's it. Okay. It's Pericles. I was saying Lycurgus, and Lycurgus is a different guy for Sparta. We're talking about Athens. Okay. So, and battle marathon, all that good stuff, whatever. So, here's what I'm going to ask you. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read a piece of it. Many of those who have spoken here in the past have praised the institution of this speech at the close of our ceremony. It seemed to them a mark of honor to our soldiers who have fallen in war that a speech should be made over them. I do not agree. These men have shown themselves valiant in action, and it would be enough, I think, for their glories to be proclaimed in action, as you have just seen it done at this funeral organized by the state. Did Pericles say those words or not? Not did the Peloponnesian War happen? Not do hoplites, not are hoplites real? Not is Athens and Sparta a real place? Were the words spoken by Pericles real words that were spoken? Are the words in the text the words that were actually spoken by the man? That's the question that's being asked. Did Pericles really make a speech? Yes or no? Was Pericles really in Athens at the time of that speech? Yes or no?
Perspectival accounts of Jesus's life, and they're not identical. In fact, as I say, if they were identical, you wouldn't need four. The point of reading these, and I think the way to read them. Let me say a word. If you want to determine veracity, you have to operate a little bit like a jury, and by that I mean pick up the Gospel of Mark, the first of the Gospels. Now, by the way, these Gospels are written very proximate to the events they describe. And I say this by the standards of, we're talking about historicity of any historical document. 70 AD, would you say, for Mark? Yes, I mean, I would say within decades of the events that they describe.
But crucially, would you agree with most historians that this happened, for example, after the destruction of the Jerusalem?
I disagree with that. I think these were written, at least orally recited, before. I would say all the Gospels, except for John, were orally recited before the destruction of the temple. Do I have proof? No. I have faith. Do I think that they are within the first 5 years or 10 years? No, I think all of them are written after Paul. I think all the Gospels are written after Paul writes. But I do think that the events described are events that happened before the destruction of the temple. And I do believe that Mark, possibly Matthew, were both written before the destruction of the temple. Do I have proof? No.
The Jerusalem temple, thereby allowing the author of Mark to put the prediction in the words of Jesus' mouth without doing anything.
But I
this is a highly debated point because Mark's gospel leaves off incomplete and has...
And not just Christian prophecy, but other prophecies as well, including Nostradamus.
What seems to be at the...
Do I think Nostradamus was a real prophet, though? That's a different question. And I'm going to say no.
The very end and added section. I don't want to debate that little fragment of Mark. Here's what I'm getting at. If you've never read the Bible,
why bring it up?
And we've all read the Bible in a way. I was raised Catholic, and so I
don't you bring that to my house. Don't you bring that to my house. Don't you bring that I was raised Catholic stuff. I am Catholic. I was raised Catholic. You nominal cafeteria Catholic.
Was habituated to going to Sunday Mass and sort of felt like I had to get into the Bible. I've heard these stories read and so on. But it was a completely different experience for me as an adult to go back with critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through. It has the complete ring.
Okay. So I read the Bible beginning to end, the ecumenical. Oxford Ecumenical Study Bible. I've read 3 different versions of it, which I love. I've read the King James, which was terrible, the New King James, which was okay. I read the NRSV, which I happen to like the previous version. I haven't read all of the updated edition, and I'm not really a fan of it, but it's good. I've read the ESV, which I'm not a fan of, but I think it's really great for speaking to Protestants. I've read the NAB, which I love. I read the CTS, which I think is amazing. I've read the book, the 700 Club version, which was a bad mistake. I read most of the Good News version, which is a Catholic one, but it's an easy reader. I know I've read 3, not including my 7 reading them all the way through, but I have read 3 different Spanish language versions, including the one for Spain. I tried to read the one for Chile. That one was hard. And the one for Mexico and the one for the United States is in Spanish.
Ring of authenticity. And I say this because not only does it...
NAB is still my second favorite. NRSV is my favorite. CTS is my third favorite. The RSV I don't like at all. The King James I think is trash.
Give you little details that don't really seem to even belong there. It's clearly not written with a polemical purpose exclusively. Mark will tell you things that not only seem irrelevant, but at other times undermine what he's trying to say. And
why would you admit that in a debate? Why?
And that is the true ring of authenticity. Because if someone were to, what's that?
An example?
Well, here's an example.
No. Dinesh, stop.
The Jewish tradition, the testimony of a woman was considered inherently suspect.
The criteria of embarrassment, I think, is the absolute worst criteria I've ever heard for anything. I know that people buy into it. I know that there's even scholars that buy into the criteria of embarrassment. I don't care. I think it's the worst criteria of anything. As someone who has been writing stuff since I was 16 years old, I've been writing, maybe 15. I've been writing. You can write something embarrassing that's completely untrue, that isn't real, that never happened.
Suspect. But the testimony of men generally reliable. And therefore, not that the testimony of women is disregarded altogether, but you needed, for example, many women to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now,
you never, Manamoto Musashi, you never do the same move 3 times, because your opponent will know what's coming and will have a counter ready for you.
the Gospels tell us that when Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb,
Every Protestant and evangelical pastor and apologist has used this explanation. Watch what happens when you use the same explanation too often.
if I were Mark and I were Luke and I were trying to be inventive and I were trying to establish a truth for posterity, I would not have it that a group of, let's just say, hysterical women, Mary Magdalene, whoever it was, a group of women go to the tomb and they are the ones who
You
find
might
the
actually be using the words of William Lane Craig.
tomb empty. This is like a little dubious because most people can.
Or what's his name? The crazy dude who's Australian. What's that guy's name?
Go, well, yeah, we know, but women, So here's an example of the gospel.
Thank you for that added sexism. That helped things.
Insisting upon a point that would only make sense if that was actually the way it happened.
Well,
6 more minutes, guys.
If I may.
Go ahead.
If I may. This is
I know people have been coming in and out of the room. I know that a few incognito people have also been watching. Anybody wants to talk or bring anything up, do so now, either in the chat or feel free to come in. I'm only going to go 3 more minutes if it's just in the chat or if nothing gets popped up. If someone does hop on, I'm willing to go another 15 minutes, but after that, I got to go to bed.
This is a commonly presented argument for the historicity of the resurrection, which, by the way, now we're talking is.
Well, I'm not necessarily. No, hold on. I didn't say it's an argument for the historicity of the resurrection. I said it was.
Dinesh, you opened your own can of worms.
An argument.
Let me say a word.
Okay.
Now we're talking.
Thank you for finally talking
about these texts if they are historical texts. And the thing about women is, look, this is quite straightforward to me. Who anoints bodies? Who goes to tombs and anoints bodies after someone dies? It's not men, it's women.
And this is the explanation that I like. And I've seen this explanation in multiple commentaries and multiple study Bibles, the explanation that O'Connor is about to give. O'Connor is literally doing the work that the Sosa should be doing.
And so if the authors of the Gospels had the men go to the tomb to anoint the body, which is what Mary and the other women were doing when they went to the tomb, that itself would be very strange and give us reason to doubt that the...
This is an argument for why the Bible is true, or why the gospel account of this event is true. Because the argument for embarrassment leans into it being literary and the changes being made for theological reasons.
The historicity of the event. In other words, it's like if there's a task that women do, and that task is how...
So therefore the women would do the task. Does that just make sense?
Jesus' empty tomb is discovered, then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you said that you need multiple women's testimony. How many women go to the tomb? Multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately after seeing the empty tomb? They run and tell the men who come and verify it for us. Right. So I don't think that this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that if this was an invented story, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but if it were, then of course we could expect the people who discover the empty tomb to be women, because it's women who go to anoint the body at the tomb.
Okay, so let's put together what I just said and you just said. Mm-hmm.
No, please don't.
Let's ask the question, based upon what you said and what I said, did it happen that way? And
I know there's people in the room right now who aren't fans of Jordan Peterson, but Jordan Peterson had a great comment back to a question like this, and it's like asking whether or not the Three Little Pigs really did tell the wolf to go away. Asking the wrong question, which you yourself said earlier an hour ago in this debate.
And I would submit that what you have done, see, you're doing special pleadings. You could argue I'm doing special pleading.
How is it? Why is the special pleading, Dinesh? I don't think you give this answer, but explain to me. Explain A, what special pleading is, according to your understanding, and then explain how this matches special pleading.
But I would admit that the thrust of the Bible and the thrust of the story is, in fact, aimed at delivering a truth from Revelation.
That's fine.
What you're trying to do is saying, all right, I can't contest that because that's outside the domain of reason. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt sort of the nitpicking strategy. And because we got 4 accounts,
hold on. You're the one who brought that up. You're the one who said that.
I did.
Thank you, O'Connor.
Women discovering.
And I'm saying nothing you've said has even slightly refuted it.
You don't think anything I just said refuted the idea that would be something you wouldn't expect from the gospel authors if it were invented?
No, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I mean, let's look at what we agree on, what we disagree on. You agree?
No, just answer straight.
That in that culture, the testimony of women in general counts for less.
I think this is something that Josephus tells us, but it's impossible to know what sort of culturally people actually thought at the time. It's impossible for us to know. But I'm happy to grant.
O'Connor is now undermining your sources that you don't even know are your sources.
Yeah, sure.
It's impossible for us to know, even though Josephus says it. Okay,
but that's in a court of law, right?
Okay, we're done. We're done. I'm not going to let this commercial play. We're done. If I got 100 views on this by tomorrow, by 5, let's say, by the end of the day, if I get 100 views on this video by 7 o'clock tomorrow, by Sunday, if there's 100 views on this, I will finish this video tomorrow night. Thank you. Good night. I hope everyone watching this enjoys watching me be frustrated. Sorry about the opening 30 minutes with the Muslim stuff. I was hoping to have a conversation about Islam. There were no takers. But anyway, hope you all have a great night. I appreciate all of you. Dr. Kip, thank you for gracing my video. I greatly appreciate that. Shivam, I will be doing Hinduism Week soon. Not maybe this month, probably next month. Mitra, I will be talking about Marcion soon, probably within a month, as I will be reviewing Tertullian's against Marcion. Selah, I always love having you on. I appreciate you, brother. Sorry we couldn't talk about more Islam, but you didn't really bring any questions, and I needed some engagement. And to myself, thank you for doing this for 3 hours. Good night. Bye.